Carol, would you do a roll call? Here. Here. Thank you, Carol. We have a quorum. I ask we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Just a little background. This is the not the budget meeting that starts at 7. This is a special meeting of the Board of Education. We essentially have one item on the list, and that is the approval of the Cheshire High School Code Compliance Improvement Door Accessibility Upgrades. Mr. Massiani, do you want to give us an overview?
Yes, I will. I'm going to sit here just so it's a little bit easier to see me. Thank you, Mr. Perugini. Good evening, everyone. The purpose of tonight's special meeting, which I appreciate was pulled together rather quickly, is there is a request in front of the board to pass a motion so that we can continue the process of the school construction grant for our high school code compliance improvements, and specifically the door accessibility upgrades. What I'd like to do is start with a little bit of background of the reason for this project, and I have provided the board members 4 handouts. The first one is a letter dated July 2nd, 2019 to Dr. Adrian Wood at the Connecticut State Department of Education, which just refers to the update of the Cheshire High School Voluntary Corrective Action Plan, which was updated as of June 30th, 2019, which is the next attachment that I'll explain. What's important about this for the board members, and I know we have 3 new board members with us, is that the high school in 2009 was reviewed by the Office of Civil Rights, and they found a number of deficiencies that had to be corrected, most of them falling into the category of ADA compliance, Title IX compliance, and over the years we've been making improvements and corrections so that we could meet the requirements of the plan that's in front of you. And it's an extensive plan. It's 18 pages. There are 52 items, and there's many sub-items under the 52 items. So the Cheshire Town Council, after the board approved a request in its capital budget, approved $1,383,000 in order to complete what is essentially and hopefully the final phase of the improvements under this corrective action plan. So we hired Silva Petroselli to do a review of the ADA improvements that we needed. It was prioritized. So what you have in front of you, which we'll go through the details in a minute, is a request in which we will be upgrading over 80 of the classroom doors at Cheshire High School to make them ADA compliant. And the details of that are a little bit more involved. It's not just a door replacement. We have to pull out the existing door frame. There'll be an asbestos abatement for each of those door frames. Door frame has to be removed. It has to be repositioned so that it will meet the ADA requirements. So a new door frame, a new door, doorknob, and any other hardware has to be included as part of this, this project. We do plan to complete the project this summer. The reason this is in front of the board is in order to get the state construction grant, which is 46% of the project cost, the state requires a number of different items to be approved by motions of the board or the Public Building Commission. This is a Public Building Commission project. So tonight, the request for the board is that the board has reviewed and approved the project manual, which we included as an attachment when we sent out the agenda for this meeting, the project manual, the preliminary designs, which we're showing on the screen, and the estimated budget. So really what the board is doing is just, tonight indicating that they've reviewed and approved this so that it can go out to bid. We cannot go out to bid on this project until the state approves all the documentation that we have to provide. We're meeting with the state next week, January 28th. So this resolution is necessary so that our board chair, Mr. Perugini, can sign document SCG 042, which is one of the state forms, and that would be that Mr. Perugini is certifying that the board has reviewed and approved this to go to bid with these documents. The last point I want to make before I have Mr. Clavette, who's our facilities manager, give you a little bit of the design detail, and I'll introduce him in a minute, is this is a Public Building Commission project as the school building committee. So it's in the hands of the Public Building Commission. They've done all the legwork, they've done the review, they worked with the architect to come up with the design, and Mr. Clavette can give you a little bit more detail on that. But the other signature that goes on SCG 042 is the person from the Public Building Commission, and this is the form I'm holding up here because Mr. Clavette has already signed it as the Public Building Commission representative. So with that, Mr. Clavette, can you give, just a quick overview on not only the design, but the work that you had to do with the fire marshal and the building official to get to this stage? I'm going to give you the mic.
For those of you I haven't met, my name is Rich Clavette. I'm the facilities manager for Cheshire Public Schools. May 1st will be a very fast 3 years already, so I'm getting pretty familiar. Time flies. I know, I say wow all the time myself. As Vin alluded to, this is a Public Building Commission project. It was assigned to us by the town council. I believe the PBC actually created the RFP to find the design professional to help us prioritize the list that Vin put in your packets. It was deemed at the time that the doors were probably the low-hanging fruit, and it would have been the part of the project that would have represented the greatest amount of accomplishment to at least to get us in on the ADA track. Ultimately, the exact number of the doors that this project covers is 78 doors, where we have to do a complete structural renovation, which some of these detailed drawings depict. Obviously, in the school's made up of 4 different construction projects covering multitudes of decades, so the design of each of these doors into the hallway are different. Fire codes were different at each one of those times. So we have to address each one of those doors independently. The 78 doors represent the bulk of the project only because of the amount of structural renovation that has to occur. As Vin alluded to, each of the frames has to be pulled out, which is currently slushed in with concrete. The walls have to be demoed. In some cases, there's a closet that's adjacent to it in a classroom, so that has to be demoed. There's a significant amount of demo, and prior to even that occurring, there will be a significant amount of abatement. It's probably going to represent 30% of the entire project scope. In addition to these 78 doors and frames, there's another 83 doors that we're going to be modifying hardware to. So we'll reuse the frames, the leaves. Currently, the hardware is not ADA compliant, so we'll be addressing those. So this project, if we can accomplish it during a summer shutdown, during a school summer session, represents touching 161 doors total. So it's pretty significant. Can you page that from here? Just the door schedule. So as far as construction projects, the door schedule is pretty much, you might see 12 line items, like for an office renovation or apartment building renovation, you might see 30. So this represents 161 doors, so there's a lot of detail. Once the estate approves the construction grant, we'll be charged to get it out to the public and get it bid. The big challenge is going to be finding a contractor that has the horsepower to get this accomplished during, summer recess. So that'll be the PBC's challenge to get that done. There'll be a lot of project management involved. I think right now the basic RFP calls for meetings twice a week. I don't see that happening. It might be, or twice every 2 weeks. I see that probably twice every week. And we could be talking multiple shifts, to try to get that work accomplished during the summer. So we'll see what we get for contractors when it goes out to bid. And
So part of the board's review has to include the cost estimate, which is one of the attachments that we've provided. So with contingency, architect and engineer fees, environmental fees, the grand total, and this is an estimate of probable cost. Obviously, when we go out to bid, we will know what the final cost will be. It's $1,248,094, and on the right-hand column, there is a column that's labeled Connecticut and eligible. So the $133,312 of the project cost is ineligible. So the good news is that the bulk of the project, assuming this estimate is what we get without bids, hopefully it's lower, we would get 46% of that, roughly $1,000,001, back in the form of a school construction grant, and so that money could be used for the completion of the project beyond just these doors. So that is the long and short of the request in front of the board.
Sorry, I had to take a bio break for a second. I don't know if you covered or went the reasons why we had to call a special meeting. Was the timing of this? Did you cover that history a little bit?
Correct.
I don't
So,
want to be accused of scheduling meetings at the last minute. It's not my intent.
no, I did explain that, we did need we were unaware that we needed a motion from the Board of Education on this in addition to the Public Building Commission. We were under the impression that the signature on the SCG 042 was sufficient, but we were advised by the architect on this project that we need a motion from the board indicating that they've reviewed and they approved the plans to go out to bid. You're not making a final budget approval. You're just indicating that you reviewed and approved this to go to the next step. Ultimately, the state is going to dictate whether or not we've given them everything that they need in order to get this project out to bid. And it has been reviewed by a building official and by our fire marshal, and it did get negotiated. There were, some changes that needed to be made. They've signed off on this phase of the project. The state did not always do it this way. You would submit projects to the state. They would do the entire review. Now the state's flipped that responsibility back on, in this case, our town, in order to get all those reviews and signatures in advance of a project going to approval to the state before it can go to bid.
Thank you.
And the other thing, just to reaffirm, we are meeting with the state January 28th. So this really is the last piece that we need in order to have a complete list of things that the state wants.
Any questions on Vincent's presentation from the board? Seeing as there is none, do I,
Well, yeah, just one question.
we'll do it during the motion.
Yeah.
Do I have a motion? Andrew?
Make a motion to approve.
Page 2.
I'd like to make a motion to approve that the Cheshire Board of Education has reviewed and approved the final plans, project manuals, and professional cost estimates prepared for bidding by Silver Petroselli and Associates for the Cheshire High School door accessibility upgrades, project number 025-0101 CV, dated 10/14/2019.
Thank you, Andrew. Is there a second? Catherine Howland seconds. Discussion.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. This was to adjust the doors so that they all are flush with the hallway, and I'm not sure if you explained that already.
Well, no, it's not so much flush to the hallway. You need the space to allow a wheelchair, so you need space on either side of the door in order to accommodate, an ADA requirement. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's flush to the hallway pathway. It has to have the proper clearances, and that's what defines the ADA compliant.
Okay, thank you.
Faith?
And you're relatively, or pretty certain that we are going to have this completed by the start of school in late August? And if not, relatively certain.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is gonna be dependent on, we've had multiple delays with the state. They might have addressed it in an earlier meeting, but the state, earlier in the year changed their, construction grant process. And, it was, common sense would have dictated that would have been faster. It was just the opposite. It was much slower. So we've had a delay in trying to get this in front of the state. It's been alluded to. We're meeting with them face to face next Wednesday to try to get this through the pipeline. If we're successful next week, we'll get the final bid package, put in front of the PDC for approval, it'll go to the town council for approval, and then be publicly advertised for bid. So, yeah, there's a lot of things have to happen in sequence, and there's not a lot of time to waste.
And so one of the, pieces that I'll add to that is when it goes out, to bid, the bidders will have to be able to give us a schedule, and we'll identify the dates of work, when they could start, when they could finish. We will, in the case of this project, we'll schedule the start date probably for, the Monday right after we believe school will end, and then we need the project to be completed, 2 weeks before student arrives generally is the deadline date, because staff comes into the building before students do. So, that is something that we'll be looking at closely. The Public Building Commission, I've seen how they act. You always look and interview the winning bidder to make sure they're going to meet that deadline, and then, you work through any issues that would cause a delay. So the abatement work is always done first, so that we know, even if the construction work's not completed, we can have the abatement out of the way so that we could allow students back in the building. So the intent, though, clearly, is to be done in time for school to start.
Just so if we, God forbid, it doesn't happen, does that in any way affect the grant? I mean, do they penalize us for somehow missing a deadline?
No.
Okay.
No. That wouldn't be their issue. That'll be our problem to deal with any kind of construction delay. Once they make a commitment to the grant, then as long as we're compliant with the requirements, and they're generally more financial, they're not, around scheduled dates or anything like that. But that's clearly on us.
Any other questions from the board? Is there any questions from the public? Seeing as there is none, I'll repeat the motion. Move that the Cheshire Board of Education has reviewed and approves the final plans, project manuals, and professional cost estimate prepared for bidding by Silver Petroselli and Associates for the Cheshire High School Door Accessibility Upgrades Project number 025-0101CV, dated October 14th, 2019. All those in favor? It is unanimous. Motion passes. Thank you, board members. Seeing as there's no other business, I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor? It is unanimous. This meeting is adjourned. Here, items discussed. There will be public comment, section number 3, and if possible, the Finance Committee will discuss and take possible action for a budget of the board. But we're going to start with section 2, which is continuing on operations and maintenance, or what? Is that you, Mrs. Solon, or Vincent
Oh, you
Massey?
do special education first. Is that, you okay with that, Trace?
Okay. I always look forward to this presentation, actually. So.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Hussey. I'm the district's Pupil Personnel Service Director. I'm also the principal at Thomaston Alternative School, and I'm happy to be with you here tonight. I plan to take you through a highlight of our unique programs, and what I tried to do this evening is to take a look at some of the Durg B school districts that have a similar special education population as we do, as far as percentages, and kind of give you a feel for where they're falling with certain things in comparison to us as a district. I'm going to basically offer you explanation to some of our requests that we've made and why we need them to support our programming. Please feel free to ask any questions along the way. I'll try to answer them the best that I can. If I can't answer them, I will find answers for you and get them to you in a timely manner. This portion should only take a couple hours, so let's begin. Just kidding, just kidding. All right. Okay. So the data that you're looking at right now is from EdSite. The most recent EdSite data is from the 18-19 school year, but I wanted to once again just refer to the districts that you're looking at. Once again, these are districts that have, they're in our DIRG, that have similar percentages. So over the course of this presentation, I'm going to kind of talk through, several things, as I said, how we're scoring, some of our specialized programming. It's important for us to explain and present to the board on an annual basis some of our specialized programs. And then I want to refer to some of the requests we make and how they reflect the needs in those specialized programs. So what I wanted to point out to you in this is that our percentage rate of 12% of our total school population receiving special education needs is lower than the state average. I believe the state average is about 13.5, but similar to other DIRGs, falling, relatively close to some of our partners. I did want to highlight 4 categories in particular: autism, intellectual disability, other health impairment, and emotional disability. Those are 4 categories under the identification of special education, and those are some of the areas where we're seeing the most need here in Cheshire. Most recently, over the past 4 or 5 year trend, and I've talked to the board about this in the past, is a rise in mental health needs. So what you see there is the last 2 categories, other health impairment and emotional disability, is those 2 categories would be where a lot of kids that struggle with anxiety, depression, and other mental health needs would fall. Okay? Does anybody have any questions so far? All right. One other thing that's noteworthy, other health impairment also covers the umbrella of ADHD. Okay? I know that Mr. Solon discussed our scores, our test scores with you. I wanted to highlight our special education test scores. So once again, using some comparative data to other districts with similar percentages, we did very well this year on the ESPA. And when we looked at the state data on the ESPA from 18-19, when you look at all of the school districts that had scorable markings for special education, some districts do not because they're small in size and they don't have the percentage that is required to score, to consider it scorable. But from all of the districts that did have scorable markings on EdSite, we ranked 5th overall in ELA and math for special education. So we're really proud of that. Also, our SAT scores, reading and writing, we were 3rd in our DIRG for our special education students that were assessed. And in math, we fell solidly in the average, in the middle for our math scores. Last year when I was with you, I had requested 2 additional school psychologists. I explained the need. I presented some statistics that were a little bit upsetting in regards to what we see with the rising mental health needs, suicidal ideation, self-harm, kids that are really in crisis. And you were wonderful in supporting us not only by the 2 psychologists that we've requested, but moving forward the recommendation for 3. So this is last year's numbers in comparison to those districts that I'm highlighting and where we fell with amount of students to our mental health providers. But with the addition of this year, that number is going to significantly improve. So I just want to say thank you. As a result of that position, I reached out to the school psychologists before this presentation, and I asked them what they've been able to do as a result. I mean, it's very important to have you recognize that at this point, we now have a full-time school psychologist in every building. So where in the past, they were shifting and sharing. So that commitment to be there, to build those relationships, to be on hand for the school-based teams is much more solid now as a result of what we've done. And this is some of their feedback directly. So I just want to give you a moment to share some of the things that they've reflected. And just ask if anybody has any questions about any of that input. Okay. So once again, thank you very much. Okay. So the next piece, which I'm really going to focus on tonight through, being the most important part of the presentation, is our specialized programming. I was able to reach out to the directors in these DIRGs that I'm kind of comparing us to this evening, and I heard back from several directors with very targeted questions that I asked them. In regards to their specialized programs, I asked if they had pre-K ABA programs. I asked if they had elementary leveled ABA, middle school, and high school. ABA is a very specific programming that works with our autistic population to teach them very discrete skills in a very targeted, prescribed manner. And then we also received data on how do they support their social and emotional needs. Do they have therapeutic programs within their district? Do they have an alternative high school? What's the level of staffing that are in those programs? And how many students do they serve? And then I lastly asked about their transition programs. Under state law, we're required to provide post-secondary education, employment, and independent living training for students in between the ages of 18 through 21 once they reach and have succeeded their 12th grade year if the Connecticut Core Transition Standards haven't been met. So we're required to do this transition planning. So I asked them about their programs there as well. So as you can see, we have the most specialized programs in our district in comparison to some of these other districts that have a similar percentage. And you can see how many students and how many staff are needed to run these programs. I'm going to take you through what some of these programs do. So I'm going to start off, I don't have pictures and,
If you go back a slide, I'm just curious, why? The difference in the total number of students serviced in the programs, is that better identification? Because I'm looking at the school populations, the town populations, and I'm thinking they're similar. It's 25 to 30,000 for each of them.
right.
I'm not sure about District 15, but
So
it seems very smaller.
the specialized programs are internal programs that are designed to meet very specific needs. So if, let's say, a district like Region 15 that had 5 specialized programs, they may not have had, let's say, therapeutic programming internally. So I'm going to go through what programs we have here internally so that you can get a feel for what those programs specialize in and what type of student they help and assist with. So there's a point and a logic to this slide, to point out that when we have these internal programs that, as you can see, take a lot of staff to man, the difference is that we can keep students in our district, in our home schools. So for a district like, let's say, Region 15, that maybe doesn't have as many internalized programming, you're going to see later on that their out-of-district placement rate in programs that are private outside of the school system or in a RESC, like CREC or ACES, are going to be much higher, okay? Any other questions on that? Okay, so just kind of an overview of some of the programs that we do have. I didn't go chronologically, but I should have. Quinnipiac University houses 2 of our transition programs. We have students that are doing employability training there, and then we have students that are attending college coursework there. So we use Mount Carmel, and we use the North Haven campus, and we have a really solid partnership that works well for the students because they can be in a setting with typical peers that are their age, and they can be learning those skills that are required under the Connecticut Core Transition Standards. So employability skills, socialization skills, communication skills, and activities of daily living, independent living. So they utilize, at the North Haven campus, which has a training program for nurses, OTs, PTs, they utilize the model apartment. So they're able to practice all of those activities of independent living. They have partnership programs with the nurses, the occupational therapists, and the physical therapists. So they're learning about nutrition. They're learning about proper dental care. They're learning how to manage their funds. So it's a win-win. Thomaston School is another specialized program. Thomaston is our alternative high school. It is housed in the Board of Ed building. I'm the principal there, and there's a fantastic staff of people there. And Thomaston currently has 27 students. We started off the year at basically what we deem full capacity, because that platform for those kids that require significant social and emotional needs is a growing area, okay? Thomaston will offer a smaller venue, smaller class sizes, a lot of close relationships with teachers, access to a social worker full-time, a part-time school psychologist, but with the smaller number, those kids are able to check in with that social worker daily if need be. The team does an amazing job with communicating with families. That's critical. A lot of these kids that we have there, are academically so capable. Some are even, gifted. But they've struggled with mental health issues that have caused chronic absenteeism, have caused real high levels of anxiety with returning to school. So the current, program offers a respite and an opportunity to re-engage. And they're successful, as you can see. Some of the students just this year that are graduating have been accepted to, colleges in the area. Some have applied for and received grants, and, yes?
There's a question from a minute ago, actually.
Sure.
You had mentioned it's a growing area. Why? Better identification, a shift from kids going to other towns, coming back to Cheshire, more problems in society? I'm just thinking of a variety of different reasons that come to mind. I don't know if any of them are right, but just in your own professional opinion, why is it a growing area?
In my own professional opinion, I think that you've targeted a couple that I consider to be possibilities. I think that students have limited sometimes social interactions because of how our society runs. I think that communication, the social relationships, the pressures that our society function under have certainly made an impact. I think that also there's a growing need that maybe can't be met through as much interaction. I think that kids sometimes are, at least what we're experiencing, maybe too tapped into technology that replaces some of those social connections that may have been stronger in the past. Those are theories of mine, and some of the demonstration that we see from the students where just having them put their technology away to engage in the classroom lesson can be tricky. So I think that that's a big piece of it. Any other questions about Thomaston? We also have a very strong life skill-based program. When we had our showcase at Highland, you heard about the ABA program, and that's our elementary life skill program, but there's also that ABA program at Darcy School, and there's also a life skills program that has an ABA component at Dodd Middle School, as well as at Cheshire High School. The primary population that this program would serve across all of our levels are students that have autism and intellectual disability. So the curriculum is going to be very different. It's going to be functional in nature. It's going to guide them towards our performance standards, trying to help them be as self-directed as they can be, to be able to effectively communicate, to be able to problem solve. So we teach those skills through goal setting. So all of our students that have IEPs have goals and objectives that address a variety of needs. If it's social and emotional needs, they have a social and emotional goal and objectives that they have to cover. Life skills, they're going to be exposed to a life skill-based curriculum for functional math and functional reading. They're going to have activities of daily living. They're going to have a communication goal so that they can work with a speech and language therapist to better communicate. So their academic program is very driven by their IEP, where those goals are housed. Unfortunately, there was a great link here. I would really strongly encourage you to go on if you didn't see. It's a Channel 8 news story, and it's only about a 2-minute clip, but it's called What's Right in Our Schools, and it highlighted the Cheshire High School Ram Roasters, which is part of the life skills program they run a actual coffee cart, and they will bake goods, they will take care of brewing all of the different coffees, teas, waters, and then they sell it to staff. So they're able to plan for all of that, shop for it, itemize it, budget. They're able to communicate, practice social skills, collect all that money, and then plan for what they need to purchase after shopping and preparing and planning a menu. So all good things. I also just want to note down here, this is a picture from a Best Buddy event at the high school. So it's a win to see how large that program is at both of our schools, and Highland School has a unified sports program as well, where typical peers partner with students with disabilities. They really learn from each other, and there's such active chapters. Hundreds of kids are involved in these programs. ABA Darcy, Highland, and then also Bridges. Our Bridges program, here are some pictures from Doolittle. When we start to think about the social and emotional needs, Bridges offers a therapeutic program. So the criteria for that type of entry into a program is students that have average to above average cognitive and academic skill set, but that are really struggling with issues of significant anxiety that's debilitating, or they're people that have had significant trauma in their life and are struggling in a typical school classroom. So the staff is skilled and trained in aspects of responsive classroom, but in addition, the work of Ross Green, which is a collaborative problem-solving model. So it's really solving things in the moment and helping them process and move on. And then they also have received significant training in Ruler, which is out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. There is a program, therapeutic program at our elementary level, where all elementary schools can bring their students. If there's a problem, it's housed at Doolittle. And once again, this is a pretty specialized program. So students that would enter into Bridges would be students that other typical interventions have not worked. And we're seeing a lot of success. The kids that are in the upper elementary program, many of them are now out in the general ed classrooms for half day, even more. So it's been successful for them. So the idea of these specialized programs, I mean, we're able to provide very highly tailored, individualized instruction to meet very unique needs. The idea that we have very collaborative teams. So these programs are working very closely with social workers, school psychologists, school counselors, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, physical therapists, the BCBA, okay, to help guide a very collaborative process to meet the individual needs of these children. Once again, that IEP drives the instruction for these programs, okay? Although these students are going to be exposed to as much general education curriculum in the standards as possible, the primary is going to be their IEP to guide their instruction. All of these programs promote very close relationships with families, okay? Whether it be a child in crisis therapeutically with social and emotional needs to a child that has a limited ability to be able to communicate on their own, the relationship with the family is critical. Another very important thing is that it provides education to them in their hometown with their peers as much as possible. And we have to do that by law. It's also very fiscally responsible, because if we can create these programs and we can take care of the needs of students that require much intervention and highly individualized programming, we can avoid some of those out-of-district tuition costs, all right, which are extraordinary. Any questions? So I just want to kind of go back to when we talked a little bit about those specialized programs. Once again, this is the information from 18-19 on what those schools that we highlighted have spent on their out-of-district tuition. Okay? So, as you can see, Cheshire was the lowest in out-of-district placement, and our tuition costs associated are significantly lower as a result. What you also can see is when you have those districts that don't have those specialized programs, the number of students that they have to outplace are going to be significantly higher, as is their out-of-district tuition rate. Okay?
This is an incredible array of programs. What warrants an out-of-district placement?
Well, everything has to be considered on a continuum of service. So we have to look at the weaknesses that students have. We have to develop an appropriate program. The idea is that it should be least restrictive. So if a child was identified as having anxiety, they wouldn't go straight to, let's say, Bridges. They would start off with the services that they have in their home school. And it's always kind of a trial and error. We start off with the least restrictive opportunity, and we see, is that going to accommodate and modify and support them enough that they're successful, as much as they can be in the typical classroom. But if it's not, then maybe we have to look at the next step on the continuum. So we might be looking at a self-contained reading or math class where they're really receiving their instruction by a special education teacher. We have that available too. They might go to a co-taught classroom where two teachers teach together, a general education teacher and a special education teacher. We're always looking at what's the next step if it's not successful. So the students that are in these specialized programs are students that would not be successful in the general education classroom. For many of the students, especially in the therapeutic programs, they're students that have struggled traditionally for a long period of time in large school settings. Some of those students with therapeutic needs, in fact, I can say that most of my students at Thomaston School were chronically absent last year, and absence continues to be a real area of focus for us. So it's always going to be a consideration, and there's no formula to it. It's very individualized because there's lots of variables, and it has to be based on the individual's needs, if that makes sense.
So to be outplaced, the needs are so severe or that there's
We
nothing.
can't meet them anymore, right,
And there are 25 students in our town.
currently, yeah. So just to kind of put things in a financial perspective, we have that 112 students that are currently in these specialized programs. If I had to place them in and out of district placement, and the rate that you see right there, that 58,410, is currently our lowest out-of-district tuition rate. Our out-of-district tuition rates can go as high as $150,000 per student. And that's minus transportation. Transportation is a whole nother issue. So this is the calculation for that 112 at that lowest tuition rate. And then if you took, so I took all of the salaries from all of the teachers and all of the instructional assistants that are in those specialized programs. So that's what their salary combined equated to. So it's really a difference of close to $4 million. So I can only speculate that if we didn't have those programs, we would be spending millions more in our out-of-district tuition.
Question. What I heard you say, and these are my words, not yours, but what I had heard you say before was technology, cell phones can
That-
be, sort of, you're thinking maybe that's a problem for some of the special ed kids which is a growing area. So my assumption is that, most students are responsible with their cell phones, but honestly, I'm just curious, do you think, at younger ages or any ages, would it be worthwhile for them to not be using cell phones at all in the schools? Would that be?
I think that there's such advantages to technology and what technology can give for instruction. I really don't have an answer for it. I have a worry. I worry that I'm seeing more students that seem to be unable to remove themselves. But then again, I'm dealing with students that have significant needs. So my vision is going to be skewed, and it's going to be a little bit more narrow. I'm not sure what impact or what feedback I would get from, teachers in general. I've never asked that question. Any questions on this?
Going back to the out-of-placement, how is it, and I don't know if you have this answer, how is it that Farmington is able to do outplacement at such a lower cost per student? Did you ask them what?
I didn't.
Do you have any idea what they're doing?
I could follow up and see if I can get back to that.
Is it perhaps proximity to UConn? I don't know.
It could be, yeah. I could ask. So that leads me to the requests that are currently in our budget. We had requested a .5 special education teacher at Darcy School. We had requested a .5 special education teacher for our 18 through 21 programming, and a .5 board-certified behavior analyst. So I'm going to give you a little bit of explanation as to why we're asking for those positions. The .5 teacher at Darcy, currently there's a half-time teacher there, and there have been some significant difficulties with only having somebody that can case manage those students that are so young and so needy on a half-time basis. So more direct contact time with children, attendance at PPTs that can be scheduled also in the afternoon, which makes it more readily available for the whole team, including the parent. More active ability to participate in the SRBI process. Definitely more ability to evaluate. And also, oh, sure. So a PPT is a planning and placement team meeting. So that's for any student that has an IEP. The team comes together and does that goal setting that I was talking about, okay? They have to meet at least annually, one time a year, the team together, parent included. When the students get older, student included, and they have to plan collaboratively. Every 3 years, they have to reevaluate. They have to see, is this student still somebody who's going to qualify for special education? So there's evaluation that's standardized that comes into play, but then there's also all that input from the data that they collect on the goals and objectives, from the classroom performance. So there's many different avenues that they look at to evaluate. And then SRBI is scientific research-based intervention. So when somebody is starting to have difficulty academically or socially and emotionally, an SRBI plan will be certain measures that you can put in place, interventions that can help support that child to see if you can close the gap before making a referral to special education, okay? So, I mean, really, the ability for somebody to be there full-time is going to close the gap for some of the weaknesses that we've seen this year. And it's really important to note that, you know, each year, Darcy's numbers may start off low, but during the course of the year, we see, you know, that number increase. The .5 life skills teacher at the high school, there are 3 programs currently. I explained Mount Carmel, I explained Quinnipiac. We have included a community-based program for students as well, and we utilize the Youth Service Bureau's Yellow House, which is right across from Cheshire High School, and they are wonderful to allow us to use that facility through the course of the day, and students will go out into the community to volunteer or work. They practice their recreational skills out in the community. They are certainly learning about how a community functions, and there is some employability training as well. And this year they had 2 students that were a part of that program with a .5 teacher. Next year they're moving to 6. And then the BCBA. Once again, I go back to the showcase meeting that you were, that you were a part of, where you heard a little bit about both Bridges at Doolittle and the ABA program at Darcy and at Highland. We also have the ABA program that continues on at Dodd and the high school. Our BCBAs are very valuable parts of making that machinery work in those programs. They are definitely on high demand because we do, as I've said, for the past several years, have students that seem to be having significant issues with social and emotional well-being. The BCBA, if we were able to increase and include another half-time, we would try to focus on more of a proactive intervention. Currently, our BCBAs are very busy in our ABA classrooms, but also doing what's called functional behavioral assessments for students that are exhibiting some very concerning behavior in the general education classrooms. So from those functional behavioral assessments, they put behavioral intervention plans in place. It's time-consuming, and there's been an increase in requests. So the idea that an additional person could help support proactively that SRBI team that's trying to do interventions before things become crisis would be really beneficial. We also have some mandates when it comes to physical restraint and seclusion and exclusionary timeout that all staff need to be trained and then retrained. So that's a need that our current BCBAs take care of. Also, the chronic absenteeism that I was talking about. So the BCBAs can be helpful in running some functional behavioral assessments that even some focus on chronic absenteeism or truancy, and helping to develop teams that are seeing trends at a young age, because the research behind chronic absenteeism is that early intervention, when those trends start to emerge, is the most beneficial. So referring back to that, the BCBA could be very helpful in helping us with the problem that we do have here. Once again, this is the chronic absenteeism data from last year, 18-19 school year. As you can see, these are our special education numbers. 88 students were considered chronically absent that have special education. Our numbers are higher at the secondary level. Kids will hit a threshold of frustration, and then we start to see, basically a retreat. I'm not attending. So I know that last week, Mr. Massiana had talked about tutoring as part of the PPS line. I just want to give you one scenario for how chronic absenteeism impacts us. So we will sometimes look at students that have chronic absenteeism and so significant that they're avoiding school on a daily basis. We have to develop plans with them. Sometimes that involves tutoring. So there is a process also for kids that are currently medically unable to attend school. Dr. O'Connor, our board treating physician, helps us with that process. He weighs in, collaborates with the other doctors that make recommendations for homebound instruction. And some of those requests that we see coming in aren't only medical. They are emotionally based: anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. So we do have students, that definitely are receiving instruction through tutoring as a result of that. Many of our tutoring referrals come in from Cheshire High School, and it's because these kids are just not attending. So it's not a Cheshire problem. This is a problem across the state. And as I said, I can have some theories, I can have, some ideas as to why, but I don't have an exact answer, nor do I have any research to back my theory. But I do think that we're seeing the number explode. I have about 24 kids currently being tutored in our afternoon program at Thomaston. So I have 27 in the day, 24 in the afternoon. Now, in the past, we've done truancy programs with Connecticut Behavioral Health. We also have out-of-district placements, such as Cedarhurst School or Hope Academy in Milford, where we have placed students as a result of them not attending. And one of the problems that we see sometimes is that they continue not to attend. So now we're sending, because they don't attend, doesn't mean we don't pay for their seat. You understand how that works. They have to pay their salaries. So what we've tried to do is build our own internal team with a social worker and certified teachers that sometimes are going into homes, working with families, doing that counseling, trying to prep them for the next day and to get them reacclimated into the school environment. And that has shown some real nice success with a couple of these kids. I can think of 3 right now that one of them hasn't attended school in 3 years. The other 2, sporadically, over the past 2 years, maybe 20 or 30 days total. So in order for us to do that, we're paying tutors by an hourly rate that's established in Cheshire as the rate of pay. And if I'm tutoring a student for up to 10 hours, which is what's allowed for homebound tutoring instruction by the guidelines of the state, if I was to do that for the whole year, it would be $24,000. And that may seem very high, but in comparison to, once again, Hope Academy at $75,000 for a tuition for a student that's not attending.
10 hours per week?
10 hours per week.
Okay.
Yes. The idea is that we build that rapport and that relationship, and we continue to increase that time and gradually get them back into school. So some of these kids that have had situations like that, where we started in the afternoon, we have eased into the day program at Thomaston. Sometimes they've returned to their homeschool. So it depends. Once again, there's no formula. It's all how they individually, respond to the interventions and the programs. Okay? That's really all I have for you tonight. I'm happy to take questions. No.
for your excellent presentation.
Okay, thank
We
you.
appreciate it. Thank you for coming back. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Again, Vin Massiana, the Chief Operating Officer for the Cheshire Public Schools. So what I have remaining is the last section of the budget to present. The section is maintenance and operations, and I will just jump into this section. The Cheshire Public School buildings, as you can see from the chart, average about 69.25 years. Our oldest building is Thomaston at 108, and Highland Elementary is 49 years old. And I will, as we go through this presentation, I'll give some updates on some of the excellent work that we're doing to make improvements to our buildings and to come up with a plan for the future as well. But the school buildings that we have are aged, and so the maintenance of those buildings is an important component of our budget. So we're going to address first the dollars that we spend from our operating budget, and then I will touch on the capital budget. So between our maintenance budget within our operating budget plus the capital budget, that is really where we fund our building repairs, maintenance, and improvements. So it's important to keep that in mind as we go through this first section. Overall maintenance and operations is 5.1% of our budget request. You could see that this year the total amount requested for operations and maintenance is $3.9 million. We're looking for about an 8.13% increase over the current year's budget, and I'll give you some detail, which I think is important. If you look at the components of that $3.9 million, the first thing that stands out is that a little more than a third, about 36%, $1.4 million, is for utilities and heating of the buildings, and I'll give you a little bit more breakdown of what that is. Building maintenance and repair is $1.29 million. The cleaning of our buildings, which is contracted out to a vendor, that's $785,000 is our anticipated cost for next year. That's about 20% of the operations and maintenance budget. And then you could see maintenance supplies about 7%, and equipment maintenance and repair is about 4% of the total budget for operations and maintenance. If we just focus in on the utilities and heating portion, that's about 36.5% of our overall maintenance budget, $1,431,766. And then you could see that electricity is the biggest component of that. It's $714,000. In the past, our electricity costs were over $1 million per year, but with the improvements that we've made to our buildings through the energy performance contract, as well as other improvements where we've made changes from fluorescent lighting to LEDs, we've seen the cost of electricity go down overall. Heating oil and natural gas is about $388,000 in our budget. And then you could see that garbage and recycling is about 11% of the request. Water, we have regional water authorities supplies water to all our buildings. That's about 6%. Gas and propane, primarily that's for our kitchens and food service. And then we do pay for sewer use, at our schools to the town, so that's about $39,000 per year. So that rounds out, what we call utilities and heating. So the other 63.5% of the budget, that's really more of the maintenance lines. So of that $2,492,000, $785,000 is for cleaning. $541,564 is for building repairs and improvements, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Something breaks, we have to pay to fix it, whether electrical, plumbing, or anything along those lines having to do with our buildings. We do maintain outside grounds. That's about $312,000 per year. And related to that, you could see that snow plowing is $120,000 is what's in this budget request. That is a variable. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lowered. This year we're running pretty good, and we hope that it continues. We're, most halfway through January, a little bit past that, so hopefully we'll have a positive variance this year on that line. Maintenance services, those are services that, we need. If we outsource, if we have some plumbing that we can't do internally, we'll outsource that. So that rounds out 63.5% of the overall operations and maintenance budget. If we look at this like you have it in your budget books, these are the line items that make up the total budget request for operations and maintenance this year. And you can see that the line items that we're looking to have the biggest increases are maintenance and repair for the buildings. I will note, as you could see in the red, typically when our budgets are reduced, we'll reduce some of the line items that we talked about previously, curriculum, textbooks, and the like, but we'll also reduce our maintenance budget lines. So that's the history in 1920, this budget year. We did reduce $80,000 from the maintenance and repair in buildings, and then the other line items you could see we reduced about $20,000 in total. The reason that maintenance supply, we're requesting a $50,000 increase is because we have been doing more of our repairs in-house. One of the newer building maintainers that we hired does have his license, and he's able to service all our burners and our boilers. So it's cheaper for us to buy the supplies and have somebody on staff to do that than to outsource those services. So that's part of the reason that the supply line is going up. Yes?
So, this might be a policy question, I'm not sure, but you mentioned cleaning services, snow plowing services. Those are all, you have a lot of different things that are outsourced, right? I'm just curious, do you go out to bid every couple of years for all that sort of stuff, just standard protocol?
We do. So we went out to bid for our cleaning services. This is the third year, in this budget would be the third year with this cleaning company. So we went out to bid 3 years ago. They actually lowered. The incumbent was the low bid and actually lowered the price that had been, bid previously. So we do what we typically do with the cleaning bid, which is the largest contract within our maintenance line. Obviously, our biggest overall contract is transportation, which we also bid. So the cleaning service, is one of the ones that we go out to bid, and then we typically add extensions if we can negotiate a reasonable price. And moving cleaning services, we did do it, I guess it's 8 years ago. It's a big deal, to move from one vendor to another, but if it's worth doing, we certainly would. Snow plowing is another one. We did bid that a couple of years ago. I think this is also going to be our third year with snow plowing. And then if there's specific projects that we need to do, if they're above the threshold, it's $25,000 for construction. We would put those out to bid separately.
What's the number for services?
It's I think it's $14,000, but if it's construction, it's $25,000.
Okay, thank you.
And the town council, and I see that there are two of our town council members here tonight, Mr. Orris and Mr. Belleber. So those are set, those limits are set by the town council, and they revisit those annually. This is just kind of a little bit of a background on what we have. So if you look at our school buildings, beyond the 8 buildings, there's a lot of detail as you go down a little bit deeper than that. So we have 300 learning spaces across our 8 buildings. There's about 760,000 square feet of buildings. thousands of square feet of roof systems, sidewalks, so there's a lot, obviously, and I realize that the board members and community members are aware of this, but, you know, operating the school district and the maintenance of the school district has a lot of details. And so what we typically request in our budget are the must-haves. You know, we're not looking to do anything in this year's budget that is, you know, aggressive in terms of improvements. We're looking to maintain the buildings, what we have, and keep them in good repair. So now I want to take a quick look at the capital budget. So these are the requests that we made for capital for the next 5 years across our buildings. And you could see it totals $28,600, $22,000. So the improvements to the cafeterias are $6.2 million, window replacements across the district of $5.7 million, you know, roofing, sidewalk, masonry, $5.5 million, HVAC, $4.2 million. And as you just look at those categories, all I want to, you know, focus our attention on is, you know, over the next 5 years, we know we have certain large building needs, and you could see the categories that are the largest. But there's nothing in here, again, that is outside of what you would want to do to keep your buildings in good repair, keep them functional, you know, and safe for our occupants. And then if you look at just the one-year funding request that we made, it was $3.5 million, which was approved in its entirety by the town council this year. In fact, they exceeded expectations, which you'll see in a second. So those are the areas that were requested. They were approved. So these are the projects that we will be tackling. And if I show you the same $3.5 million in terms of what school building they'll be going to, I'll get there in a second. There you go. So overall, some of those projects, like our sidewalk money, that would be considered a district-wide project. But you could see that, not surprisingly, Cheshire High School, our biggest building, square footage-wise and classroom-wise, that's the largest request. Doolittle and Highland, those requests are specific. We're looking to replace the boilers in both those schools, so that's why that request is, on a percentage basis, as high as it is. Norton will be renovating the kitchen and the cafeteria. So this is the request by building. And so what I really want to highlight here is this is the 10-year funding that you could see the board requested and the town council has approved year over year. And you could see that for 1920, that $3.695 million that was approved was actually higher than the board's request because the town council approved $150,000 for a school modernization plan. So that's why I jokingly said the council exceeded expectations because they did add additional dollars, which was important to do. The other thing I will point out is prior to 2015-16, you see that the approval rate was less than 60%, but the last several cycles of capital budget approvals have been much, much higher, which, again, age of our buildings, you know, the town council certainly has been very helpful in the approval process. So we're able to get more done to keep our buildings in good shape. And we do need to keep the buildings running, so we not only care about the buildings, but we take a lot of pride in doing, you know, everything we can to keep them as operational and safe and clean and nice looking as possible. For the board members that are new, I also wanted to point out that we do have a maintenance safety net. It's called the Building Maintenance, CNR stands for Capital Non-Recurring Fund. So there's $221,000 in that fund. If there were some type of an emergency and we couldn't cover it within our operating budget, we make a request, you know, first to the board and then to the town council to release some of that money or all of that money if we needed it in order to complete whatever repairs, you know, needed to be done. And you could see the list there of some of the things that we've done. There was, you know, a high school boiler replacement, West Gym roof one year just kind of started blowing off and we had to get it done very, very quickly. work on the utility tunnels. So it is there if we need it. We're very judicious, from the board's perspective about, when we request that. If there's a repair that we can cover within our operating budget, we take care of it that way and leave that as a reserve. And it's been replenished over the years. You could see in November of 2017, the town council approved $65,000 to be added to bump that up a bit. And so when we look at anything we do in our buildings, rather than look at it as an expense, I think it's important we look at it as an investment. So the things that we've done, the more notable, more visible projects we've done in the last couple of years are items like the Doolittle Elementary School, kitchen and cafeteria. It's not only looks better, but it's also more functional. Doolittle, that very open two-bay area, had one door in, one door out, just pretty much a standard 36-inch door, only one serving line for the students. Now, not only is it much more open, we have two different serving lines serving different food, and we could get students through twice as quickly because now we have two places for students to pick food from, as well as two people that are actually, ringing the student out, and that's important. The students typically, we have a lot of lunch waves, and they're very short for the students, so the quicker they can get their food and sit down and socialize and re-energize themselves, there is an absolute educational benefit to doing that, obviously. So that was Doolittle. This is from, this year's improvement of the Doolittle bathrooms. We replaced, bathrooms that were pretty much original to the building. They look a lot better. The picture doesn't do it complete justice because, the smell is a lot better. It smells great in there now. And that's, these are the type of improvements that are visible and they last for a long time. So we can continue to run the buildings where we've made these improvements, until we either renovate or replace the building in its entirety. So these are some of the less visible things that we do. This was Cheshire High School. This is the one of the art rooms in the lower level. This is where they work with clay, and you could see there's some kind of air conditioning looking gizmo. That's a very effective filtering system. We were having some indoor air quality concerns in that room. That solved the problem, and that you can't really see it too well. It looks like you're looking through something that isn't quite clear. That's just, drop-down pieces of plastic like you would see in a warehouse, but that separates, the dust and some of the dust that's created when they kiln the clay. So improvements that, not only the teaching staff, but the students appreciate, help the overall programming in our school as well. And then things like roofs, they're not very visible, the improvements we make, but they help preserve and maintain, our assets. So that's a good-looking roof that went on, part of Cheshire High School this summer. And then there's the really innocuous things that we have to do. So this year we had quite a bit of investment made to repair masonry, and you could see that there's those cracks in the bricks. You don't want to let those, go on for too long because it just worsens and it could lead to structural damage. So, we had New England Masonry go around several of our buildings and make quite extensive repairs. Again, keeps our buildings, keeps our buildings going. This is actually on the second level of the Norton Elementary School gym. That's a window. That blue area is a part of the window unit. The windows, when they were installed, what was eventually discovered is that the flashing wasn't installed properly, and we were getting leaks inside the gym for years. Thought it was a roof system, it actually wasn't. Mr. Clevet, who you saw tonight, figured that out, so that's some of the work that we did. Again, not visible, but important work we do. And then these are some of the things that you probably don't notice, but they're there. So the one I will point out, that's Doolittle on the top right there. Those two fixtures are LEDs. All of Doolittle outdoor fixtures were relamped, converted from whatever they were to these LEDs. And these LEDs, they are programmed so they dim down at night, but they have motion sensors, so they come right back up. The lighting is much improved, so it's the type of thing, if you are a Doolittle parent or you visited Doolittle frequently, you may not realize that it looks better, and it's because of this lighting, but it's there. And it saves us money as well, because we relamped from what was previously more expensive technology. Yes, sir.
Thanks. You had mentioned there were some improvements at Norton. The flashing was a problem. Was there, what's the downstream effect? The vendor, is there insurance? What's the age of it? Did the building inspector do
Yeah,
the
so-
job right?
Those windows were installed before my time, so they were
I was
installed
guessing it was a long time ago.
more than 10 years ago. But the roofs have been, the leaks in that area of the Norton Gym have been persistent. Couldn't figure out what it was. Well, with a little more investigative work, they did figure it out. So that, actually, you could see that line of copper is the flashing that they added, and that was part of the repairs that needed to be done. Does that answer the question?
Kind of. It's nothing, it's not, I realize it's before your time, but it does still.
Yeah, so there's no claim that we could make. You know, there's nobody to put it back to.
No, but
we
it's,
do the
to me, it
repair.
raises the question about the building inspector, which
Yeah.
isn't you, it's the town. And I was on the council at the time, so
Yeah.
maybe it's on me, but.
Yeah, maybe so. So we've numbered all our doors for security purposes. So if you drive by any of our schools, you'll see that, you know, there's a number on our access doors that was, you know, part of our school security improvements. You know, worked with, you know, our fire officials in this case to do that. And there's a consistent pattern. You start at the main door and you work clockwise. So these are some of the things, kind of invisible, kind of boring to talk about, but I just want to, you know, mention that these are the types of things that make a difference. The ceiling tiles and lighting replacements at Norton School. Again, you walk into the school, something feels better about it, and it's those little things that are the types of things that we're talking about here. So probably the best news on maintenance and operations is that a school modernization committee has been formed. There's 13 members, 3 from the Board of Ed, 3 from the Town Council, and 7 members, you know, from the community. A chair has been appointed, Anne Marie Kemp. Renee Martinez is the vice chair. The meetings have been regular. There are subcommittees that have been formed and have been meeting. So, you know, I'm certainly very excited about that project because the goal is to, you know, develop a plan that we can start working against, you know, to make long-term improvements to the schools. And so the last piece of information here on maintenance and operations is, this is the slide that you've been seeing. So, you know, what is the maintenance and operations budget as a percentage of our total budget? And you could see it's remained relatively flat. There's probably not a budget request high enough that I could make that would be reasonable to do all the things we could do to make improvements to our building. I'm not saying our budget, you know, isn't adequate, but the more we get, the more we can do to continue to make the improvements to the building. So we've made a reasonable request to increase the budget, and that's up certainly for the board's consideration. Any questions on that? Because the last thing I wanted to do, and then Mr. Solon will wrap up, is I do have some follow-up answers I wanted to share with the board members from the last couple of meetings.
I'm sorry.
Vin, in regards to the maintenance and supply line, you had mentioned that you wanted an increase of 50,000 because you were finding efficiencies with having in-house service done. And so the line item was at 202,000 and you wanted to go up to 252,000. So what exactly did you have identified that would increase the line item budget, but then somehow find efficiencies? What's the logic
Well,
there?
the efficiency comes from having our licensed staff members, plumbing and the boiler work, having our licensed staff do it and buying the supplies, whether it's plumbing, we have a licensed electrician on staff, licensed HVAC individual, so we buy the parts, so the efficiency comes from not paying a vendor to do that work. The bulk of the $50,000 is to buy, components for plumbing, electrical, HVAC. So now, maintenance, that particular line item also includes other things, salt, for spreading, when we have snow events, and any other supplies that we need, whether, it's parts, screws, bolts, nuts, that we'd need for our buildings. So the bulk of the increase will be, though, for the higher cost items where our tradesmen can do the work for us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just to follow on to Adam's question, then I have another one. So you're saying that there are efficiencies in the maintenance and repair, so 430, right? Line 430, is that where we're looking for those efficiencies?
The contracted service portion,
Okay. I just,
yeah.
all
So
right.
you can ask the question, I'm just pulling my book up as we go.
Yeah, I guess if that's where we're looking, it's still rising 10%. So without that, we would be seeing a higher percentage increase?
Yes.
Okay, and then, I am a layman, so help me here. When you go and you make an estimate of what it's going to cost, what goes into that? Like, how are you doing it?
With the maintenance in particular?
Just any one of, yeah, let's just take maintenance and repairs. You're asking for $190,000 plus increase. And what are you using to project that?
Well, part of it is what we've spent in the past. So if you look at, the 420, for example, maintenance, repair, equipment, the first column shows what we expended, $182,154. And in this year's case, we're requesting $157,850. So part of it, is history. And then, Mr. Clavette prepares these budget line items, so he'll look at what he thinks need to be done across the district. Some of the line items, and the supply one in particular, you could see in 18-19, we actually spent $325,800 in that line. So we're not asking for that same level of funding, but, maintenance is tricky because you don't know what's going to break. You can identify the things that you want to service or repair, but you don't know what's going to break. So we do kind of budget for what we've seen in the past historically and, adjust accordingly.
In calculating those costs, it's CPI plus, do vendors give you ideas of what's coming down the pike?
Well, not in these lines. So, a good line for a vendor is our cleaning services. So we know what our cleaning contract is this year. When the cleaning contract was bid 3 years ago, we got a price for 2 years. And so this is the third year. What we're doing is we've built in an estimated increase on the vendor line. So that one's a little bit easier because we have an expectation, and I don't want to necessarily say what it is because we will be negotiating with the vendor. So the vendor line cleaning services are much easier to look at and estimate. Maintenance, that's a tough one. And as I said, I can't ask for enough money because if we had more money, we would do more, but we're trying to be reasonable about what we could do. So if we're not spending it on a repair item, we'll find a use for the funds to make an improvement in a building.
So you mentioned that you have an electrician, and now you have a licensed electrician, E2, I'm assuming, or, and now a licensed HVAC mechanic as well.
Correct.
Do you have any sort of apprenticeship program?
That's a great question. No, because we can't. We, we looked into trying to, have an electrical apprentice in particular, but they, our staff isn't licensed so that they can have apprentices.
Oh,
we
so they
don't.
need an additional license to do that?
Yeah, and I don't know the details, but, we were trying to build a career path for our building maintainer ones, and our tradesmen, we call them building maintainer twos. We have 5 of them on staff.
Okay.
But no, we can't do an apprentice program. We tried that. And the licensed staff, what we do with the 5 tradesmen is they'll be assigned to a building, but if we have a need, they'll go to whatever building,
Sure.
we have a need based on their expertise. So, if they're not doing that work, they're responding to all work orders that we get and that are assigned, by the facilities manager.
When was the last time you looked at it?
The apprentice program?
Yeah, the idea.
It's 3 years ago,
Okay, thank you.
yeah. Anything else?
Electric rate?
That what?
Did you happen to get the electric rate? The rate that you're paying for your schools?
Yeah,
The delivery rate, really, not the generation rate. Do you happen to know? If you don't, it's fine.
7.85.
For generation, I was wondering about the delivery.
No.
Okay,
I
that's
will
fine.
get that to you.
All right, thank you.
Marlene, can you just, you're keeping track of the questions? Okay, I will get that to you. I do have some answers, and I'll go through these very, very quickly. One of the questions was, are we earning the 7.5% assumed rate of return on our pension funds? I explained during our presentation that the pension fund rate of return was lowered from 8.25% to 7.5%. And so the question came up around that. These are the rates of returns as of the end of each of the fiscal years. This information came right out of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which is available on the town's website. It's actually on the first page, it's right in the front and center if you click on it. So I pulled this information out of there. So you can see that the rates of return in 2019, and that is the fiscal year 2019, the second half of this year, the stock market went up much higher. But as of June 30th, the rate of return is 3.84%, the prior year is 6.88%, and the prior year before that is 9.85%. So in the last 3 years, we've exceeded the 7.5% one year, did not exceed it the last 2 fiscal years. So the actuaries are, I believe they've completed the 3-year valuation. The last time it was done was 2016, so the new valuation is being done. We haven't received it yet. I spoke to Jim Jascott, our finance director. But we do expect to receive it soon. The question and the recommendation, according to Jim, will be that we take that rate of return assumption and bring it down even lower. And ultimately, that is a decision that, does get made, by the town council specifically, but there's recommendations that will come from different groups such as the Pension Review Board. So if we reduce the rate of return assumption lower, theoretically we would have to increase the contributions to the pension plan, unless the valuation shows that we have enough of a return that you don't have to increase it. But that's the performance over the last 3 years. The one thing that Mr. Jascott added is that, it's obviously managed very conservatively. And so you look at this and say, well, gee, the stock market's been up, over 20% last year, but this entire portfolio is not invested in stocks, and it is designed to protect the downside risk in the portfolio. So this is not my area of expertise, but there is a pension, review board that, meets regularly and manages these investments. So, that's kind of the update on that one.
What it says net of investment income, well, is that a significant number? Is that dividend income
No,
and it
it's-
gets reinvested, or?
They wouldn't change that number by much, according to
Okay,
Jim.
it's immaterial. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
That 2019 number, that is a full year return? That is not like a partial year, like ended June 30 or something like that?
It's ended June 30th.
Oh,
So
it
it'll be
is.
July 1
Okay.
through June 30th. So
all
it's the
right.
fiscal year. Okay, the other question that came up was, for this year, what have we invoiced and what's been paid for custodial fees and building use fees? And I've provided the board members hard copies of all this information, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but custodial charges have been $16,000 billed, $74.99 paid, and building use was $2,022 billed, $17.28 has been paid. So as I explained, this is part of the process with building use that we do, invoice and we collect those funds. Custodial charges offset the line item for custodian salary, and building use fees, those will go to revenue to the town. The last piece of information I have is when we presented on Tuesday evening, we showed these charts by sport, by season, of expenditures from the Board of Ed's budget by sport, the revenue that was collected by sport. So that third column is what's been added. And that's information that was received from Mr. Trefone. So support groups have donated, for example, to boys cross country, $268. And again, those are not money donations, those are donations of equipment is what specifically Mr. Trefone pulled. The detail of what was provided is in the sheet that I gave to the board members. The one caveat I will make for football is that Gridiron does support football. We don't have the 2018-19 numbers for Gridiron yet. We just didn't receive them in time for the meeting. But for this year, the contributions from Gridiron to football were about $10,500. So I would assume that they would be in that same range. But as soon as I have that, we'll share that with the board members. So you could see down to girls soccer, $3,150. The winter sports, again, the far right column, you could see the support group donations by sport. And this is spring sports. So as we have additional information, I will be sure to share that with board members.
Chair. I think I asked this last time, I forgot, but essentially, if we do basic math and take the expenditure plus revenue plus support groups donation, that total number, is that the true cost of the sport? In other words, is
Yes.
revenue being generated paying for things outside of budget plus the donations paying things? So in other words, the boys volleyball, if I total up those numbers, the money that's being taken in via revenue and outside groups is being used to offset costly
Or
items.
supplement what they need.
But the expenditure for that sport.
Right.
So is that safe to say that if I had put a total column, that gives us a little better representation of what's really
Correct. And so
costing?
what's not on here, just to be clear, is the cost of, banquets or other things that are more functional in nature. So this is cost of stipends, cost of transportation, cost of purchasing equipment, including what was donated.
So you're saying-
And the answer to your question is yes, it's generally, that's the total cost if you add that expenditure plus that donation, and then the revenue offsets that.
still, I'll follow up at that point. I gotta
Okay.
think that one through.
That's what I have for the, additional information. And, we'll go through the list again. If there are other things that we owe the board members, we will absolutely share that.
Just what, I might have missed it, in terms of the support that comes into the groups, was that cash, in-kind contributions, or both?
No, that's purchase of, equipment or goods. I know one of those includes a coaching stipend, so it's not cash. It was donated to student activity and paid out through student activity for that particular sport.
Okay.
So, and if you look at that,
Yeah.
at that list, Tim,
Yeah.
you could see some of the details on it.
Yeah, I'll look at it.
Okay.
I'll get back to you on
Yeah.
it. Thank you, Vin.
You're welcome.
So the outside groups, when you include the gridiron numbers, that's the complete list of all outside sources?
That donated in 1819,
Don't, oh,
that made donations to those sports in 2018-19. So that was the last full year's numbers that
okay, so we don't,
Steve
so we don't
provided.
have anything as of like this past season or,
What I gave you is just 18-19. We
Okay,
didn't,
so-
pull the 19-20 numbers, we can, but that's not what you have. So we were just
Okay.
trying to be consistent with what we reported to the board Tuesday night. Good? Sure? Okay.
Quick question from last time. What number of Wilcox students are going to Wilcox Tech this year? What are we planning for next school year? I'm just curious. That was a question from a parent I received. If you don't have it tonight, we can talk about it Tuesday.
I don't have that off the top of my head.
No worries,
I don't
just
wanna
on the-
misquote that.
Thank you.
We'll add that to, what I was just looking for is the number, I don't know, I may have the number broken down in our transportation line. I just have a total of 52 for all the VOTEC and tech schools, but I'll get that. That's easily obtainable.
That includes Lyman Hall and VOAG programs.
Mr. Sullivan?
Thank you. This is going to be pretty brief, as we're just kind of wrapping up the process here. And I, really appreciate everybody's attention. Again, I want to thank Tracy and Vin and people like Greg Gibbons and Heather Santee and our administrative team who comes to these meetings every night, but also does a lot of work behind the scenes to contribute to the process, and that's incredibly helpful. Some key takeaways from our budget process: that we started at 7%. The subsequent review, we were down at 4.05%. Is a matter of just comparisons. I know that North Haven, their board just approved their budget at 5.4%. I just saw Wallingford's yesterday was posted at, I think it was 4.31%. That board has not reviewed their budget yet. So, fiscally, we're in that neighborhood or better. Cheshire Public Schools, as we've said before, presents an outstanding value. And tonight, Tracy just kind of highlighted some of where that value comes from in terms of how we design in-house programs to be able to provide really incredible resources for our kids and families, but do it in a very cost-effective way. I mean, she talked about special education, but obviously that same spirit is replicated throughout our school system, and we get tremendous results. This does include the addition of one certified position, And through the budget process, I start this process by talking about it being fluid in nature. And so, you know, at the initial budget presentation, you know, I think we were all impressed by the eloquent manner in which the girls, hockey players, the members of the Blades Co-op who attend CHS, articulated their needs. And so I think, you know, I apologize, I couldn't be here at the last meeting, but we presented a base budget figure of $6,200 at that time. That figure was calculated based on the 10-year running average of girls ice hockey participants multiplied out by the 1,800 participation cost for the co-op, less the $225 activity fee. So that's where that number came from. We are prohibited by CIAC from asking 8th graders, like, who wants to play girls hockey? It's considered recruiting, and we're not able to do that until April 18th. So any number that we come up with here today is a budget proposal. We do this across hundreds of line items. You know, I can tell you, you know, we're budgeting tuition based on our available data, our best guess, our history, and then that line item could be higher or lower. So I think the 6,200 is a very low base. It's shared with us, you know, we can't solicit, but others have shared that there are a few girls at the elementary or at the 8th grade level who are interested. So I think, you know, the better budget number that would be closer to reality for participation would fund 8. And then again, you know, if it's over that, just like we do with other line items, you budget the best number you can. If it could be a little over, it could be a little under. So the 8 seats would put us at 12,004 in addition. Now, you know, in a $76 million budget, or the 73 million moving to what we are proposing, it would represent 0.02%. So, you know, again, our process is focused on our students. Our students articulated this. I think we try and put them at the forefront. Ultimately, you know, that's a decision, I guess, that the board has to make, but 12.6 would probably be a figure that I would be more comfortable with in terms of a budget number that we could adjust. And again, if the goal is to fund each player, then it could go up or down, but we do that with every other budget line we have too. So we try and stick it as close as we can to what we think is the number, and then we move from there. So that's a consideration, is a key takeaway. Just again, moving on and wrapping up, I think we continue to provide an excellent value for our school system, our community and our school system. Really, you know, these things highlight some of the district achievements over the past year. Top 500 districts in America for the first time. We have multiple schools of distinction. We're one of the top communities in America for music. Our athletic program is outstanding. Is Tracy, I appreciated her pointing out our Best Buddies program. I said before, we were acknowledged by Best Buddies as having the top Best Buddies program in Connecticut. We previously had the Best Buddies top chapter in America. So it's not just our test scores that are phenomenal. And we do this, I think, because we're focused on students as a whole. That, you know, 4 years ago, we made the commitment to focus on complex thinking for our kids and social emotional needs of our students. And, you know, the proof has been in the pudding. Last year, we were the 10th best return on investment in Connecticut. Again, I don't think test scores tell the whole story, but it's the only metric I have that's comparable community to community. as well as, dollar figures that are audited by the state of Connecticut. So, our SAT scores went up significantly last year. We're ranked 21st in Connecticut. And our return on investment rank is number 10. And if you look at the last 3 years, for all communities in Derby, and the change from their ranking 3 years ago to their ranking after last year's SBAC, we're number 1. And we're one of the best in the state. By almost every objective assessment measure, we are one of the highest performing school systems in Connecticut. And that's a real testament not only to our staff and our administrators, but it's really a testament to our parents. And at the end of the day, it's our students who come to school ready to learn, and they're really just, super people, great kids, and we're very proud of them. And the work that they've put in shows in so many incredible ways through their community service, athletics, arts, and obviously academic achievement. So with that, I think that concludes our formal budget presentations to the board. And we do, if, provided we don't adopt a budget this evening, then we will be meeting again on Tuesday, January 28th, here again at Dodd Middle School, to hopefully, further deliberate and possibly finalize a budget. Any questions there, Mr. Perugini? It looks like.
Clarification. So tonight's agenda is for the Board of Finance Committee to hopefully discuss and move forward a budget to the full board for review. Tuesday night is the Board of Education budget review meeting where the full board gets to discuss in public whatever they want to talk about in the budget. There's also public information, public input part before that as well. So I'll announce that at the end of the meeting. But
Okay.
I just want to say, before we move on to the next section, which I think is public comment, I do want to thank you, Mrs. Solon, Mrs. Massiana, your entire staff, all the administrators and folks that input this budget. As always, it's very thorough. It gives us a lot to chew on, and I certainly thank all you folks out there that work all day in our schools and tend to come here at night religiously for the last 2 weeks and almost every board meeting, so thank you for your efforts on this. That being said, Mr. Grip, I'm going to turn it over to you for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Perugini. And Mr. Solon, before you leave the front, I don't know if this question is appropriate for you to answer or for Mrs. Hussey to answer regarding the Title IX certification. So I just wanted to have clarification on that before we start discussing our budget here. On Tuesday, it was discussed that showing the trend line of
Right.
the up and the down of our compliance. Who determines if we are in compliance? Do we have to make a report and send it to a state agency or to a federal agency to determine whether or not we are in compliance, or who determines it on an annual basis?
Nobody determines it on an annual basis. And OCR, Office of Civil Rights, oversees Title IX compliance. So it's kind of tricky. They have released a number of what they call Dear Colleague letters. Anytime OCR provides guidance on a matter, it's through what they call Dear Colleague letters. And it could be on, Title IX compliance. It could be on other elements of, equal access. But basically, they provide guidance on like what constitutes a sport. So, so when questions arise, they will provide a guidance letter. So the what constitutes a sport, I think Tracy talked Tuesday about, for example, the fall cheerleading does not constitute a sport because they don't have competitions and they don't have certain elements that OCR has outlined. The winter cheerleading did. So, there's that guidance put out there. For example, another guidance point they say is that don't have to have equal equal sports. It doesn't, because you have boys football, you don't have to have a girls football. They say things like, the percentage, we don't expect it to be exact on an annual basis. We expect there to be fluctuations. So the way that that's been interpreted is this: if there's a trend now, an extended trend, where there's an underrepresented gender, then you would have to ultimately examine what options do we need to provide for that underrepresented gender. So our attorney has reviewed this and said, we're in Title IX compliance. But it, just simply being in Title IX compliance isn't, what our goal is. We're here to try and support all of our students and, provide access and opportunities for all of our kids. So, we do aspire beyond equal access, but by the definition of the law, right now, we're in compliance with that.
So, since it's been determined by our attorneys that we are in compliance for 1920,
It's not on a year-over-year basis. That's part of the weird thing. It's like, because they say specifically it's not year-over-year.
okay,
They say, that you have to just continue to monitor this, and that was part of that recommendation, that you look for trends. And if the participation rate is out of whack over a period of time, and it's tough because the OCR doesn't give you a formula. They're very specific about not giving you a formula. They don't say, well, if it's 3% greater for 4 years, or 6% greater for a year, or there just is no formula. So it is a little bit vague and tricky to follow, but if there is a trend that's over time and extended where it's clearly not close, it's not, within a percent or something, then you would have to actively seek to add sports for the underrepresented gender.
and does OCR give guidance as to how to resolve an imbalance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely guidance on that. There's something called the three-prong test. I've done a lot of reading on this over the last couple of weeks in addition to consulting with our attorney, because it's easier, it's a hell of a lot cheaper for me to read it than pay our attorney to read it all. But if we don't have that gender balance compliance, then you have to solicit the underrepresented gender and say, what opportunities may be out there that you would be interested in terms of athletic participation. So you would have to demonstrate, if you're not adding a sport for girls, you would have to be able to demonstrate that you've solicited that group, for example. That's like you're asking about a step toward compliance. That would be the first step.
So is it safe to say that come April 18th, that we will have to solicit?
No, it's not, because we won't have the 1920 participation data yet. Come July 1st, maybe, depending on what those numbers look like, but we don't know what the participation rate is by gender at this point. And that's why, I think when Tracy presented the data, there is a trend toward it was initially a few years back, more heavily female populated in athletics than our school was populated in athletics. The last 2 years, it's been more male populated than female. Now, if for the last 5 years it was more male populated, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. It would be, we'd be out of Title IX compliance if we didn't fund girls hockey. But we're not. We're in compliance. The trend, though, over the last 2 years has been toward more male participation than enrollment in more male participation in athletics by a percentage than in our overall enrollment. 2 years ago, it was very close. Last year, it was a little bit bigger. If that trend continues at the close of 1920, then yeah, I'd say we're moving in that direction to be out of Title IX compliance. But I don't have that data yet to be able to tell you that. We're only 2 seasons through the year. And football always throws things in terms of participation out of whack because you have so many boys playing in that fall sport. So we'll know July 1 better. But again, nevertheless, I still think if you aspire to provide equal funding, budgeting a 12.4 number is probably the way to go to do that.
Just one more question.
Sure.
So if I recall the budget schedule, we will receive a number back from the town council in May. Is that right? May?
Yeah,
Ish.
you know, put pressure on them, but
Well,
yeah, May would
I'm
be.
just, I don't recall.
Yeah,
exactly.
roughly May. And then, you know, based on last year, we're trying to, I think it was end of May, early June that we finalized our budget number. At that point, we would know better about where we stand in terms of athletic participation for the 1920 school year.
Right. When we make
Definitely,
our-
because we're at the end of the season
Right, we make our final
for spring sports.
determinations.
But, you know, in terms of a budget number, 12.6, you know, that's something that you could indicate, well, let's add that now and, you know, reevaluate, or let's reevaluate in after we get our number from the town and we have additional data. That's obviously your call, but, you know, I think the recommendation now is to just be proactive and budget the 12.4, but that's your, obviously, you know, your ultimate determination.
And going forward, I'm guessing we'll now expect, I guess, some sort of, I guess, a report on this every June, like maybe at our June 30th meeting or something, so we
Sure, we
know.
could do an end of year.
Yeah.
I mean, well, obviously, we'll do it this year. But again, I mean, there were several, it wasn't even close. Girls were out participating, boys, so it's not an issue.
Yeah.
The other thing that OCR is very clear on is they don't suggest, that this is a law that's about participation and opportunity for girls, not about limiting opportunity for males. So the goal here isn't like, geez, we have, you know, 3% more boy athletes than girl athletes. That equates to 60 kids. What sport do we have that has 60 boys that we can reduce? I mean, that's absolutely not the plan here. That doesn't help girls participate. So the, you know, OCR directive is to, you know, provide the opportunities for girls, or at the very least, solicit girls to see what sports they would be interested in. And if there's not interest in adding another sport, then at least documenting that. You know, you're not forced to, but you're forced to continually seek it and see if the interest exists, at the least.
Thank you for this clarification. I
Sure,
appreciate it.
it's a tutorial in Title IX tonight.
And one question on the 12,000 or so revised
12.4,
request.
yep.
So is it your recommendation for the budget board in delivering this that the amount of money funded should be able to cover all the participants? In other words, so if we budget for 8 and 10 sign up, is our budget going to absorb the cost of the additional 2 students, or is that cost going to be spread amongst the existing participants?
Yes, and that's the point I was making about the, you know, you try and budget the best you can. This is a unique, only from a sporting perspective, but it's not uncommon to do this in pretty much every other facet of our budget.
Yeah, I just want to be clear, so the intent is for the budget to absorb any potential, so the point is.
Yeah, again, though, I mean,
gotta
that's-
I gotta believe with lowering the threshold to participate with paying a $225 fee, maybe there'll be a few more participants, so I'm glad you revised upwards, because I would. I
Yeah,
know
that's
this
my
is-
recommendation. Again, I mean, that's, the board will make that determination. You guys, yeah.
But you would like the, again, so if additional pictures come in, it goes above budget, you will find a way in the budget to absorb that.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
With two dates that were mentioned, April 18th and July 1st, I'm just curious, does the student participation rate between April 18th and July 1st actually change? Because
No.
I'm thinking spring, okay.
No, it doesn't. What changes is that the CIAC, the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference, will not allow us, and I remember this, I was saying to Steve definitively from when I was the principal and assistant principal here for 7 years. Every spring, we put out sheets, high school athletes come and talk to our 8th graders and say, hey guys, who's interested in what sport? And then the kids would come up, I don't know if they still do this, Mike, but they would come up and fill out, you know, what sports they're interested in on the stage, and you at that point can connect with those kids. The CIAC prohibits you from doing that until April 18th, otherwise it's considered recruiting. So I don't know how many 8th graders want to play any sport until after that date. I will know the current 1920 CHS athletic participation rate probably by April 18th too, because our rosters will be set at the high school level. That I'll know sooner. But I won't know the interest from the incoming 9th graders for next year until after April 18th, probably a couple weeks after, because we do it through lunch waves for a couple of weeks and
Yeah,
get
no,
information.
And I'm just curious, do you have any idea why what's the idea behind the prohibition on recruitment? I mean, it's within a public school system, a public school recruiting for its own.
Yeah, but,
seems.
you know, when it comes to athletics, people do a lot of crazy things. So you're not, you know, there are co-op sports. Now, our girls' hockey, the Blades program is a little bit different. You know, they're pulling from schools, they don't have a huge population. There are other communities, though, that maybe they have 2 high schools. And, you know, our basketball team really needs a point guard. And if you take, you know, this haiku class that's only offered at high school X, then you can come here and play with our team. You know, if you don't, then you go to high school Y and you play for, so a lot of crazy things happen with high school athletics. And so I'm sure that somewhere along the line, somebody abused the heck out of it, which is why they don't let you do it until April 18th. It's not, you know, in a more insular district like ours, where there's one high school, it's not as big a deal. But you're talking about statewide, and this is a statewide rule. that we
Yeah, I
have to
guess
follow.
I'm still curious, does it change on April 18th that you couldn't do all that?
Well, after April 18th, I think it's fair game. And I don't know what
But you could
the
still recruit
magic of April 18th is. but
Okay, okay,
it's-
so
it's
that
not,
was,
you
yeah,
know,
okay.
tax day or something, I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we will now officially open for public comment. If you'd like to, please step up to the microphone, perhaps line up behind if there's additional speakers. Give your name and residence if you prefer.
So I'm short. Hi, my name's Martha Lindner. My address is 652 Ashley Court in Cheshire. I was here, spoke in front of you 2 weeks ago. I'm a hockey mom. I have a son who's in 11th grade, plays on the boys hockey team, and a daughter who's in 10th grade and plays on the Blades girls team. So I just wanted to come back tonight, and I appreciate Mr. Solon clarifying. I found out this morning, actually, that there was a meeting Tuesday night where it was recommended that you fund 4, and I was sad to hear that because I hadn't been approached yet. I knew you guys were doing or I knew Mr. Solon and the group was doing research, and I thought they would come back to us before a recommendation was made. So I let Ms. Hussey know my concerns, and I'm thrilled to hear, you know, that you guys are considering the more numbers. But I think we're almost there. I think 8's a little low, and I want to run it through with you. Right now, we have 6 girls on the team, and we are only losing 1 senior. So hopefully all 5 girls are coming back next year. And I found out last night that there are 3 girls at Dodd that play hockey that are coming up. So that would be a solid 8 for next year. So kind of like what Tony had mentioned, I'm a little worried that, I mean, the good news is the more you add with ice or with hockey players, the cheaper the price. So the more players we get, the cost will come down. I also talked to Mr. Trifone today, and he said that the $1,800 cost hasn't always been, that's like the worst case scenario, depending on the number of girls that we pool on the team. He thinks the number might be lower, so I think he can go back and get a better, you know, maybe it's 1,700 or 1,600, I don't know. But whatever that figure is, the other position that we have as Blades parents is we are in a co-op. It's 3 schools. Right now, Amity has 15 girls, and they fund all of them. There's 1 girl from North Haven, and then the rest are our girls. So my feeling is if it's a 3-part, you know, school, rightfully so, we could field a third of the team. Our boys have 30 or 31 kids on the team, and I think what would be equitable and fair is 1/3, which would be 10 girls. That would allow for a possibility of 2 more people coming. I know my daughter had a friend that initially did sign up. We thought we had 7, and she wasn't able to do it because of the cost. So I think there are girls that would want to do it at the $225 price, but the $1,800 is a lot. So I would ask you to really seriously consider this one time doing the right amount of being equitable, the 10, being the 1/3 of what the boys have. And I think from the presentation I looked online from Tuesday night, it looked like the guys' figures per student is around $1,800, I think, anyway. So even that figure seems kind of equitable, too. But anyway, I kind of wrote up the numbers here for each of you just to have a copy if you want to see what I'm thinking. But I really appreciate your time. Only one other thing, too. We are really hoping, and talking to Mr. Trifone today, it sounds like it's hopefully going to happen, to get these girls to have the varsity status if they're playing this sport. I think it would be really, really nice gesture if we can see that Nadia Di Natale, our graduating senior, got that retroactively, because she's the one who spearheaded all this, and she's a really good player. She's going on to Villanova to play club sport there, and she is phenomenal to watch. I watch our boys all the time, and watching her on the ice is magical. She's just an incredible ice hockey player, and I think it would be just the icing on the cake if that happened. So I'll give you my little things here, but at least gives you the information, and I'm so happy that you're all considering this and looking at the numbers more realistically in terms of what's really out there. I think it's a growing sport for these girls, and there's only more of them coming up, and it's really exciting. I think the girls' sport is actually, with no checking, much more exciting to watch, and they're really strategic, and it's a really awesome sport. So thank you for the consideration on that, and I'll pass these out.
If I could just add something there. I do want to clarify, Ms. Lindner had talked about the varsity status and stuff like that. That captains, council and things like that. We have had girls who are captains on the Blades serve on the captain's council before. We are, one of the recommendations that was made after reviewing it was to ensure that status. And I would say, yeah, definitely, I give Natalia a lot of credit for pushing girls hockey, but there are at least 6 years of girls before her that did this too. And I could definitely go on about the virtues of girls hockey, and it's great, and I appreciate, you know, that, like I said, that they did such a great job of articulating themselves in that process. That's it.
Can I also request, I don't know if this automatically occurs, but can we enter this into the minutes as well? Thank you. All right. Sir,
Mary Burnham, 45 Tress. Just a few comments as to why kids may be experiencing more anxiety, etc. In 2009, a thing called the Common Core was passed up at the State House because of Race to the Top funding that we never got. In 2010, it started to be implemented in the schools. 10 years we've had this. Curriculum was pushed down. This is the early childhood person. And kids, the pressure that we put on our kids at the youngest level, and it just keeps going, I do believe has added to some of this. Technology, of course, also. So here's how it goes in my house. This morning, I found an article, which you now all have, and I didn't have time to read it because I had to go to Enfield. So I say to my husband, I just emailed you an article. Read it. I think it's really interesting. By the time I got home, he'd written you all a letter and sent you a link to the article. Apropos of the discussion tonight on technology and some of the concerns, I really think as a board, curriculum committee, the administration really begins to need to take a look at not only the phones that our kids carry and communicate on, but also all the tablets that we use in school, the whiteboards that you all are ordering. He's gonna talk after me. He's much more into it than I am. But at any rate, I think it adds to our kids not having a really rich, good education. The way my kids did, the way that you all probably did, in terms of interpersonal relationships, real personalized learning, etc. So really take a hard look. You want to cut? You want to do things? You can subtract some of all that technology money, put it into classroom teachers and lower class size and get some really good personalized learning going on. I'm done.
yeah, go ahead.
Piece there. I know I've shared with the board before, and I think publicly as well, and you have a great track record of attendance, but may have missed the meeting where we were talking about the Cheshire Strategic Planning Group that is in the process throughout this year of reviewing research around technology, and we'll make recommendations later in the year to the curriculum committee and full board. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jack Bester, 45 Chess Road. I was planning on talking about how I believe it's really important for a district that, in my opinion, the strength of a district is how it manages and deals with its vulnerable students. I was really pleased to hear Tracy's report tonight, but it is concerning that there are so many vulnerable students in our districts that we're dealing with. And I do think part of that has to do with the Common Core and developmentally inappropriate programming at times, and also the ever-increasing use of technology in our schools. What I want to basically say, and I did send a letter to the board members, and which was just outlining some of it, but I think it's really important to understand that there's a growing body of evidence that is indicating that the amount of electronic use of all kinds of technological things with our students in instruction is really not benefiting them, and they're not demonstrating on test scores, and I'm not a big proponent of test scores, believe me, but they're not demonstrating on test scores that they're making the kind of performance gains that would be expected. And I'm afraid at times that we sometimes get all caught up in how well our kids are doing on certain tests, and I'm glad the kids in Cheshire did well on the SBAs, but it's as Mr. Solon even said, it's not the be-all and end-all of what we're doing with kids in school. And I think it's really important that as you look to dealing with the line items in the budget that have to do with, replacing electronic computers or Chromebooks or smartboards or whatever it might be, that you take a hard look, because at the beginning of these presentations, Mr. Solon told us about 7 or 8, maybe 6, personnel wishes that didn't even get into the budget. But there's a lot of technology stuff that is in this budget, and personally, I'd rather see personnel stuff in the budget. Anyway, so I know you can't nickel and dime this stuff, but the problem is all this technology doesn't end up being nickels and dimes, it ends up being hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that makes a huge difference. So that's all I wanted to say, and I'm going to give a copy because I like print copies of stuff. I do have an iPad, I do have an iPhone, I do have a Kindle, but when I read books, I read them on paper, and I rely on paper.
Mr. Besser, is that the letter that you sent us today, or is it something different? That's the same one? Okay. Okay. Thank you. Is there, oh, here we go.
Good evening. Jamie Ferguson, 105 Copper Beach. Tonight, I think after the public comment, you're still going to have a little more discussion about what you're going to put forward. The only thing I would just kind of hope maybe you flush out here a little bit more is, I think it's the Medical Reserve Fund, while it's quite a boring topic, it seems to be something that then gets discussed a lot at town council and their budget committee meeting. So maybe since there are a couple counselors here, just flushing that out a little bit more on why that's set the way it is. And then my other comment is about what we keep calling building use fees, which are really, the cost of the custodians when an outside group uses the fees. And I think a solution for that might be that there is some sort of I don't think it would be managed by the school fund or the school budget, but maybe it's a fund with the town or an account that we sort of use like a grant or a scholarship in a way, that if there's a club, a sport, some type of a community youth group or something that's giving back to the community, volunteer-driven for the benefit of Cheshire families, that instead of worrying about how we put things on the line item for costs coming out of the Board of Ed, that you go ahead and run those funds like you normally do. You had that print up earlier that named a lot of the most prevalent renters of the space here, and then they take that total and apply to this grant fund or to get some reimbursement. And that could be something that happens on the town council side, and then you could change, that's something that the town could change on an annual basis. Is there $5,000 of grant money available and it's apportioned across all of the teams that use the space? Is it $25,000 one year? It would be something that you could change a little bit over time, but you could really control the parameters in a way that here, I think if you waive all of the custodians' fees or try and come up with a way to make that kind of a contractual change, especially I think since you just signed a new contract with the custodians, that there's not a lot of flexibility, that might get the same job done of, trying to help out these school groups, but not trying to create something where we created a bigger hardship actually on the people who want to use the space, because if you can't just pick one or two teams or one or two groups to have something to get a benefit, the benefit would go out to everyone, which would then create a bigger demand to use the space. So those, the ones that have kind of legacied and been in here for a long time, you could create, the parameters in a defined, scholarship or grant type situation. So I know that this is something that I'll need to bring up at town council at some point in the future. But I just thought, as you go into your discussions, it's just something that's worth tossing around, because I know we all want to solve the problem, and in the end, the pot of money that's called Board of Ed budget or town council budget or parks, it's all the same taxpayer dollar. We just need to kind of figure out the best way to help all these youth organizations that we all rely on. A lot of us have had our kids in them. We want them to survive and to thrive, but we got to figure out how to get that done. So, thanks.
Actually, before,
Hi, Rob Orris, 71 Autumn Court, Cheshire, also a member of the Town Council. I will respond the best I can, Ms. Ferguson, on that. You're advocating for adding to budget on either side of the street, which if we have to do to support the kids, I'm absolutely in favor of that. As I've been saying for about a year now, the council's done everything we can with our fee structure to drop it to about $15 an hour. The problem for the gymnasium space is weekend time with a union janitor at roughly $65 an hour, and when you have travel basketball using it for 8 hours in a day, that adds up quickly and probably bankrupts those groups. What I believe needs to happen is we need to find an alternative method to manage and oversee that space other than a union janitor at $65 an hour. We've had some conversations. I attended a meeting just recently with some members of staff and the Board of Ed. I think they're working on it. It is not in our purview as a town council, but I'm sitting at the table to try to help because I care about the kids. And so I don't know that it's automatically just add to a budget, whether it's the town council side or the Board of Ed side. I think it's finding an alternative method to manage the space with whatever labor process we need that Vin Massiana as COO and the staff are comfortable with. I don't believe we need a $65 an hour union janitor to monitor that space, but that's just me. It's not my decision to make, it's theirs.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to, before we respond to Jamie's, and I apologize, I didn't mean to disrupt the town council earlier by not acknowledging you guys being here and present in the audience, but I know you're not really worried about that stuff. So we now know that Mr. Orris is here, obviously, and Mr. Veliver. So Jamie, going back to your thing, I think you have a great idea. It's something that's been floated around. I could tell you that myself, Adam, at least, have been working with our administrators pretty hard since Krista Hayes in particular came out in December. In fact, I met with her just before this meeting tonight just to give an update of the things we're looking at. So we are still looking to try to reduce that custodial cost with no impact to the Board of Budget. I am not in support of, and no one's asked us to do this, take money out of our operating budget that's set aside for kids in our school system for day-to-day activities and fund external groups. But we're not even looking at that. I don't think we need to do that. So what I told Ms. Hayes and others, that, including the Cheshire cheerleader, I forgot the lady's name, I do apologize for that, it's been a long day, that we're looking, I want to be able for the board, before we respond with, where we are on this, to have all the facts. And I do want to thank everyone involved because there's been a lot of information. This is going back almost a year and a half now. So the board will have the ability to discuss this at some point in time very soon in public. What I'm trying to do is make sure that we all have the facts to work with. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a board decision on what happens with that. But before, at least from my point of view, before the board goes back to the town council with either some solution or no solution, I would imagine that, that the town council, being the fiduciary responsibility in this town, would want to know that the board did everything possibly can to reduce costs, looked at every possible avenue. And I can't say we've done that yet, but we're almost there. So do know that this is being worked on. I've been pretty quiet about this because I don't like going to the papers and, things get taken out of context, there's work going on. But the folks that have come to the board and to the town council, Krista and Caroline, they've been heard, we've been talking, they've been updated. So soon, we'll see where we land. I'm positive we can try to come to a solution, but do know that we are working together. This is a little different than, we've seen. So just want you guys to know it's still on our forefront, but we're in budget process right now. Yes, this is part of it, but I think it deserves its own attention soon. And we'll get to that.
I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, there, okay. I just wanted to clear up that I'm not asking or advocating for people to add a pile of money to either budget on either side. What I was trying to come up with was a scenario where you could, the funds are going to come from somewhere. If you're in a contractual situation and you don't have the flexibility to let a different group of persons cover the space, I mean, in a way to pull down those custodian fees. Part of what the union does is protect the right to work, not just exactly how much they're paid when they're there. And I think that might be what's happening. My understanding was that there's a contract with the custodians that is going into the future, or if that, and maybe that's the discrepancy, is that contract is still fluid.
No, there's a lot more to it, and so just because I think this will help you. So no, we're not bound by the custodial contract, other than to ensure that we can't outsource parts of that role, and we're not doing that. In fact, again, I want to turn this into this discussion. I'm glad you bring this up, and I got to turn it back to you, Anna. I apologize, but so Parks and Rec will staff a person. So since we're on Chester Youth Basketball, Chester Travel Basketball, just last week here at there was a nice young lady from Parks and Rec checking the folks in, and that's not violating our contract. So what the reason is for the custodian is different from the night crew, by the way. That custodian is what's called a building maintainer. They don't just do cleanup. They don't just watch things. They are responsible for the HVAC system, the security, the cleanliness of the facilities. They keep an eye on things. They're supposed to help out with, getting the setup done and takedown for large events. That's by large word are used. So it's more than just someone cleaning up, someone throw up on the floor. And unfortunately, even when that happens, because it's a school building, we're bound by certain hazardous guidelines. I can't make the stuff up to clean those things up. So those building maintainers are trained to do that. But, so I don't want to go too much further, but, there's not necessarily a contract limitation for us.
Okay.
But however, we do have to be careful with that. So I said, I'm glad you bring that up. We'll have more detail on that soon. But again, there's good information out there. There's a lot of misinformation. But let us have the ability to do our work and report the facts. And that'll be soon.
And when I had suggested that there would be a small amount that you could apply for this, and it's a percentage that would be allocated over groups that qualified and whatever criteria was set up, a lot of that would help me. It wasn't that it was completely free, so they'd keep an eye on that they're only going to get probably 40% reimbursement this year, or 60%, so that would help them choose the more economical path forward to use the space as well. All right, thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you, Jamie. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Is there any other additional public comment for now? Okay, now we get to the fun stuff. Now we will move into agenda item number 4. Yeah, sure.
Question for the superintendent or Vin, Jeff or Vin, I'm not sure. Going back to the in-kind contributions related to the sports, there was a comment about, so some of them are, whatever it might be, uniforms, I'm not sure. The list is here, goals and things like that, commodities. But there was also a comment about like a coaching stipend that we get.
Yeah.
So I have a specific question on that.
Sure.
Is there any like strings attached to that? So if you, no, none. Okay.
So, the
fundraising groups, the parent organizations for athletic teams is usually what we're talking about here. So in this case specific to the coaching, the head coach hires the assistant coach. Sometimes, particularly like baseball, we want like a hitting coach, for example, or a pitching coach. In the budget allocation, the contractual stipends don't include that many assistants. So for example, the Baseball Parents Association may say, you know what, we want to fund a hitting coach. And so the head coach will say, okay, and Steve will coordinate that we will hire that person. The Baseball Parents Association writes us a check for that dollar amount, which we in turn pay to that individual that the baseball coach hired.
Okay, and that makes total sense to me. I guess what went through my mind is that, Mr. Smith donates $5,000 and then says, hire my son to be the hitting coach. That's not it.
No.
It is an independent review process.
Yeah, that
but- okay.
person's been hired by the head baseball coach or the head soccer coach or whoever the
Okay.
case may be.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
thank you.
we don't allow them to dictate who we're going to hire.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before we begin? Okay, so this part of the agenda is for the Finance Committee, which means that really, for this discussion, the only three people participating are me, Mrs. Ham, and Mrs. Hallen. So what we do is we will make, this committee has no binding authority. All we're going to be doing is hopefully agreeing on a recommendation to bring to the full board, and I believe it is our intention to discuss our recommendation, or hopeful recommendation, next Tuesday evening, so that the full board can then make an informed decision and then set a budget line item. If I'm mistaken, please correct me. And also, just for clarification, the only thing that we're going to be recommending is a number. Is that correct?
Yeah. You can recommend a full number.
Okay. So by that, I mean, we recommend a number, but we don't have to recommend line items to be cut or anything like that, because as Mr. Massiana doesn't like me saying, the magic and mystery of budgeting, it's like we do it without knowing the full picture when the town council goes through their deliberations. So once we get that number, then we sort of, so what we're doing is we're at the end of the day, even next week, we're giving what we feel comfortable with, and then the town council will then sort of deliberate from there, if that's my understanding.
Ultimately, you would be, the board has to recommend if there's an adjustment. So for example, if you adopt a budget or that would be sent to the town for review, we would need to know what line items would be up and down. For the referral to the full board, you don't necessarily need that, but when we do deliberate as a full board and we do pass a budget, we need to know what line items go up and down. So it can be helpful to do it at this point, but I guess you don't technically need to.
Okay.
At some point, we will need to know which line items
Even
would be
though-
adjusted.
So even though at the end of when we get our final number back from the town council, that's when we make our final adjustments, so that
Right,
even.
but we make a budget proposal that goes to the town council for review. So those line items are established at that time. I mean, that's what we do,
Well, sure,
The look
in-
on
in
Vince's
May.
face, I think, confirmed it for me.
Right.
But, yeah.
In May, when the finance committee
Yes.
reconvenes, that's when we really
Absolutely.
set in
That would
stone
be
the
our
line
set,
item
yeah, absolutely
adjustments.
right, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
sure.
Okay. Committee, here we are, almost 9:30. So what I brought before you this evening was a recommendation that I looked at and thought was reasonable, The line items I feel can be adjusted, I guess perhaps even next Tuesday. And even my recommendation has changed slightly since I handed this to you at 7 o'clock due to the girls' hockey calculation that Mr. Solon gave. So for me, just to, I guess, to begin the conversation and to review Mr. Solon's budget, asked for an increase over the 1920 budget of 4.05%, which would be a proposed increase of $2.973 million. My, just to begin conversation, proposed increase would not be that high. It would be a proposed increase of 2.65%, and that would be a proposed increase of $1.945 million. And I had identified several line items and also a proposed position, not reduction, but not to exclude a position request from this year's budget. So I guess we can begin there.
I'm sorry, I had to step away. We had way too much coffee today. I apologize. I had to step.
Yeah.
Was there a motion on the table?
There's no motion currently.
I have just a point of order. If you have a motion to make, I think the right course of action is make your proposal in a motion form, have a second, and have discussion.
I like that. Thank you.
See? Yeah, I'm doing my job.
Okay, well then I will, so we can enter in discussion, I will make a motion that the Finance Committee of the Board of Education recommend a proposed increase from the 1920 budget of $1,945,632, which would be a proposed budget of $75,302,143, which translates into 2.65% increase over last year's budget. Do I have a second? Okay, let's move into discussion. No discussion yet. Okay, well, I'll just go through several, at least one of the line items. In my proposed increase, I did add in $12,400 for girls' hockey, because I wasn't entirely sure if $12,600 was correct. I was going 6,200 times 2, which would be 12,400, okay. 12,400 for 8 positions. I feel that's reasonable. I know that, is it Mrs. Lidner? Yeah, recommended 10. Just for me, I feel that the funding for 8 is reasonable currently because that is the known amount of players who are interested currently until we get past April 18th, maybe we could know more. So I think that at least that's a reasonable place to start. Mrs. Hand?
With regard to the hockey, my concern is the precedent we would be setting with regard to the status of the group, and are we opening the door to other clubs who would ask for that similar type of funding. I love the idea of the girls playing hockey. I just don't know how to overcome that particular issue, and if we can find a way to resolve that, I would be willing to go along with the 12,600 as well.
Is there any other discussion?
Are we just talking about that
Yeah,
one
yeah,
issue?
no, we'll say anything about the motion itself. You can talk however you wish.
Okay, well, I definitely can't support as much of a reduction as you're proposing. And although I share Ms. Ham's concern about what does this mean to fund a club sport, even though I agree that it would be a great thing to support girls' hockey, but I don't know how we figure out if there's, what the end result is. So that's just something that I think we need to be careful about. If we are going to go ahead and provide funding for girls' hockey, then I agree that, assuming 8 players at this point is a reasonable assumption. So, but I also feel like it's something that I can't wrap my mind about whether or not this leads to unintended consequences that we're just not taking into account. So that's one thing. I think that there are probably, reductions that we could make to a couple of line items. But I don't know what we're doing here. Are we just talking about your specific suggestions?
Yeah, we're just talking about my motion to increase the budget by 1.94 million, not
But
5.4
how you
million.
got to that number?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everything is,
okay.
yeah, sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
So, with respect to the medical trust fund, my concern with not increasing that amount at all is that we're seeing, that trust fund balance go down every single month. And it's not that it's plummeted to nothing, but the trend is pretty clear that we are going to be eating up, quite a bit of that trust fund. I don't know, Mr. Massiana, do you know, as of the end of whatever the last month is, that we could say, what was it down to? Was it 2 point something?
2.6 million, so
2.69
as of December 31st.
months, which,
Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's the balance, 2.6 million is the balance. It's
Okay.
about 3.6 months.
okay. Point is, at the beginning of the school year, it was close to 5.
$1 million higher.
Yeah.
And as I explained, we know that we will have some funds coming in from stop-loss payments, but the balance, will
Right.
drop because we're not funding claims to the level that we expect them to come in.
Right. And my understanding is, at this point, the claims rate, the average claims rate is running even higher than what we projected. We projected 750? Is that what?
Right, and it's running.
And it's running like 780 or something?
No, it's, after the last 2 months, it's running well over 800,000.
Okay.
I think
Right.
830 was the number.
Okay, thank you. So, to me, I think it would be a bit foolhardy to not start addressing this shortfall that we're building up. And so that's something I want to, discuss. The pupil services amount that, the 27,744, the way I am, processing the budget is that is money that we actually need to support our students with special needs. And so again, I would feel sort of uncomfortable taking that out of the budget. Similarly with the special ed or, the behavioral analyst, I don't see how we can, certainly with the special education teacher, adding, one basic, yeah, seems pretty critical to me, and I can't, I really don't think it's something that we can sort of do without, let's just say. And it sounds like, to me, from what Tracy presented, is that adding that position, or those, I guess, 2 special ed positions, will make, a huge difference in the classrooms and in the schools. And so, again, I can't really support taking that out of the budget. Library supplies, you notice I skipped over maintenance and repair, because I have a real problem also not spending the money on, we got to spend money on the buildings. Maybe we don't need the whole 190,000 that is being proposed, but we've been shortchanging that account for as long as I've been on the board, and we kind of, whenever we need to shuffle money around, that's the first place we go. So, again, this is, I am trying to view this budget as, what are the priorities that we have for the school system? And I think making sure that we have funds to repair things that go wrong or improve what we can while we're waiting for, the outcome of the school modernization committee. I know it's hard to spend money on buildings. We don't know what the ultimate result of that work on the committee is going to be, but I also don't want, our kids to be in buildings that are, falling down around their ears. The library supply, you're suggesting a cut of $20,000 from, so there was no increase requested for that account, and you're suggesting that we reduce the existing budget amount, what we did for 19 and 20, by the 20,000. Is that correct?
If I recall, there was a recommended increase of 20,000 to that line item. That was not a reduction of this year's amount. There was an increase of 20,000 requested.
Okay,
If I recall, I can revisit that.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that, but that doesn't mean, okay, if that's what it was, I personally feel like we should be investing in library books, right? And again, that's a line item that I feel like we shortchange every single year, because it's an easy thing to do. And to me, it would be great if we had really robust libraries. And I understand that the future is not necessarily hard, print books for everything. But, I don't know what's in that 20,000, and I don't know, it's hard to say whether, we could chop off a little bit of that, but again, that's sort of my view. Maintenance supply, I think, Vin's, Mr. Massiana's argument for that seems like it's a legitimate, cost-saving, cost-benefit thing, that if we have people in-house that can do this work, but they need the supplies to be able to, repair plumbing, electricity, whatever it is, then I don't know how we don't budget for that. And the heat energy reduction that you're proposing, I'm not sure. I thought that the heat energy, 620, sorry, is the increase, Mr. Massiana, is the increase based on actual, increases, the 23,000, that's 620, line item 620?
Yes, that's an estimate based on what we think the cost will be for next year.
So it's not like it's a fixed contractual increase in rates or anything? I realize I'm...
Well, most of that is heating oil and natural gas.
Yep.
For heating, so, it's always a little bit of a guess what we're going to ultimately lock in our heating oil prices. So maybe lower, maybe higher. We budgeted just a little bit,
Okay. But, right. I just don't know how much flexibility there is in that line item. Retirements that we're expecting, I know, Adam, that you're assuming 6. I think that that's probably a little high. Personally, I would
not, I would probably be willing to assume 3, unless somebody knows something that, maybe there is going to be a mass retirement, but I don't feel like it's going to be that drastic. So, I'm not giving you a lot, I'm sorry.
I'm sensing a pattern here.
Well, no, I just, no. Okay, yes, you are.
Go ahead. Yeah,
Your turn.
did you have it? Yeah.
My concern is that we have, we are constrained by the salaries. I mean, even if we left everything where, as it is, at this year's funding, we're still going to be looking at a sizable increase in our budget simply because we have to meet the salaries and the benefits. So that being said, I think I told someone I feel like I'm in a dark room trying to find my way with a match. Where can we keep non-salaried items at cost, CPI plus a little bit more? Well, clearly we can't, because you look at the progress that the special ed department is making with our kids, and they need this funding. So, I have a number of items. Can we look at student activities? How far can we reduce staff training without compromising where the progress we have been making in the general education department? So this isn't helping you either, but I mean, I just feel stymied. So I would suggest that on things like, in student activities, we look to give modest increases, and I have a couple of areas, the stipends, 130, staff training, perhaps bring it down to a 5% increase. It's not that we're cutting, we're just not giving the rate of increase that has been asked for. And you guys are the experts, but at the same time, I think of the people of this town who every year without complaint, they pay their taxes, they absorb these costs. So I'm willing to continue to look for cuts for areas where we can slow the rate of growth somewhat and bring this back to the board when we discuss it next week. I mean, but again, I have to kind of figure out these tabs.
So, so in considering my $1.9 million increase, I thought about, the needs of the town as a whole. I thought about all the meetings I attended for the School Modernization Committee, and I thought about Mr. Jascott's presentation on debt service and controlling expenses when we were talking about, assuming much increased debt levels over the next 10 to 20 years. And he assumed only an increase of spending of 1.5% of the total town expenditure. So 1.5% increase over every year for the next 20 years. That was his assumption. And even then, our bond ratings and our finances would be incredibly tight at that low rate of increased expenditure. So I thought about that when putting this together. My thought was I attempted to preserve all current services, all current salaries and benefits, and almost all of the new positions that the superintendent requested. The .5 special ed, there were 3 positions identified. Each one of them cost $40,000. It doesn't matter to me which one isn't funded, because I always leave that up to the administration to decide how to fund those positions. And it could be that that $40,000 could be found somewhere else that we're not aware of, and they could fund that 3rd position. That certainly has happened before. So I think that the reductions I have are reasonable, and I'm certainly willing to, and just for clarification on the 6 retirements, I put that off to the side. That wasn't meant to be, that was a consideration as an additional offset if that were to occur when we had our final meeting in the spring, when the retirements are more known. That's not part of my proposed increase of 2.64. If actually, when you look at it down below, that would allow us to actually have a lower increase in spending, because there would be a net savings in there. And I do see your point on the medical trust reserve. That's my starting point. When we get to the spring, we will know more to see if that trend is heading in the wrong direction or not. I know that Mr. Massiana had explained that in the months of November and December, the expenses are higher because of how the medical benefit savings accounts are configured, that a lot of people do tend to incur those expenses at the end of the year. So I think by the time spring rolls around, we'll have a better idea of, obviously, because we'll have a final number from the town. But I think in good faith, we should offer the town council a number that's reasonable, so that when they're beginning their deliberations, they know that we're coming to the table in good faith to help hold costs down. So.
Okay. I don't have a problem talking about that, and figuring out a number that gives us a little bit more of a cushion going forward, but doesn't sort of ignore the whole issue. And I was thinking that, if we reduce the 689 to 350, that's not great, but it's at least, to me, that is kind of a good mid-compromise type point. We're still going to replenish a little bit more than we did last year, but we're not going to try to make it up all in one year. So that was kind of my, and on the maintenance and repair, I was saying, reducing it by 50, I could handle that, but, that seems to not do probably enough to convince you.
Well, I mean, on maintenance and repair, I saw the increase of 190,000. The line item as funded this year is 1.88 million. So I thought that would be a good place to start if we just held maintenance repair at its current level, that, we begin at 1.88 million. I know it looked like we had an overrun this year. Is that correct, Mr. Massiano? Did we have an emergency, or was I looking at 17, 18 on that line item, if I recall? Hold on, here it is right here.
Well, we allocated more dollars to maintenance and repair at the end of the year so that we can complete projects, which is typical, especially if the items that we have to do, if they weren't funded in the budget, we look as we get into April, May, what projects we need to complete, what dollars are available from other line items, and then we allocate the dollars to that.
Right. So, yeah, so it looked like, okay, you have here, you expended 2.033 million in 18-19, and the current budget for this year is 1.88 million. And are we on line for expenditure this year? Or was there?
I'm going to say yes.
Well, how much have we, could you say how much we've expended so far?
Well,
Ish?
we know what's expended and encumbered.
Yeah.
We're like 82%.
82%,
So,
okay.
but, some of that's just encumbered funds. Just remember that 1.88 million was the approved budget, it wasn't what was requested last year. So that line item was reduced as part of the budget reduction.
But we're doing okay, 82%. It sounds to me like there's maybe some contingency in there, because if you've encumbered quite a bit then, yes?
Right, but we don't encumber for repairs. Right, you encumber for the
Correct.
maintenance and the
Right.
things that you know, and then the difference is repair.
So what you're saying is what you don't know is 18%? Or no?
Well, it could be higher than 18%.
Well, sure, but, so what I'm asking is that what you do know has been encumbered for the entire year? Okay, thank you. Well, I will call for a vote. We'll see where we are. There's a motion on the floor to recommend to the full Board of Education an increase of $1,945,000. Let me start that over, make sure I got the right number. Okay. There's a motion on the floor that the Finance Committee recommend to the full Board of Education an increase over the fiscal 1920 budget of $1,945,632. All in favor? One. Against?
Against.
One.
Look how exciting you just got.
I know, this got exciting.
So your motion failed.
And we've
Oh,
got a
it's-
tie.
Faith hasn't voted yet.
Just,
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yes.
There's a motion on the table, discussion is over.
discussion is over, so,
You have a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Against?
no, I will vote with Mr. Grippo.
The motion passes. So we have a motion to go to the full board for next week. I have nothing else on the agenda for this evening.
Thank you, Chairman, Finance Chairman Grippo. Before I adjourn, just a little house cleaning here. So this was a special meeting of the Board of Ed so that we can sit with the Finance Committee, observe, watch, and hear the debate. So that's why you saw the three members of the Finance Committee just have their discussion on a proposed budget that will be forwarded to the Board of Ed. Tuesday night, January 28th, is a special meeting of the Board of Education. We'll be here at Dodd, and unfortunately, I lost my papers at 7:30 p.m.
7 o'clock.
7 p.m., where it will be a regular board meeting, special meeting. I'm sorry, 7:30 p.m. And this is on our website. Tuesday, the 28th, 7 p.m. Thank you, Mary. You're pointing me to the right direction. So January 28th, 7:30 p.m. is a special meeting of the full Board of Ed to adopt a budget. That meeting has a couple of parts. One, there is a dedicated public input section. So members of the public, for those that you've been attending or you haven't been able to attend, there's another opportunity Tuesday night to come forth to the board, make your recommendations, comments. If you cannot make the meeting, you certainly can email us, contact us, and we'll ask the questions for you. And just at that meeting, the board will discuss this motion that was just passed out of Finance Committee, and just want to, as I think is going to happen, I just want to ask our board members to brush up on your Robert's Rules of Order, because as you saw tonight, the motion was made. It could be amended Tuesday night, as I think it might be. Yeah, so just know the procedure, I'll guide you through it. So for the public, this is a recommendation that the full board will take up, and we'll see what comes out of that Tuesday night.
Following Robert's rules, point of clarification, 7 or 7:30?
7:30 as advertised, yeah. I'm happy you're here, Mary, seriously, it's been a huge help. Catherine, before I adjourn, did you have a question? Did you want to say something earlier after the motion? No. Are you all set? Okay. Yeah. That being said, we have no further items on tonight's agenda. Before I adjourn, thank you, everyone, for sticking it out for a good 3 hours. We appreciate it. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Catherine, seconded by Adam. All in favor? It's unanimous, mostly. Thank you.